You're now entering the Rambling Veteran Podcast, where we discuss the hard truths affecting combat veterans today. Depression, PTSD, suicide, both successes and failures. How the service branches treat us, how the VA treats us, and our own country, for whom we served. And we're leaving no stone unturned. These are their stories. Hear them, feel them, and let them be a call to action. Greetings and welcome to the Rambling Veteran Podcast. This is Micah. Going forward in the podcast, we are going to do short trip reports or like a route video, because I'm going to try to do a motorcycle ride with each trip and then kind of talk about the weather, the ride, the trip, the planning that went into it, and then why I'm making that trip for the person that I met, for that veteran ultimately. So today we ended up riding, it was March the 22nd, ended up riding to pretty much west of Nashville. Pegram is a little town, it's called, and we ended up riding generally north for about an hour. Pretty windy roads along the river. It was quite beautiful scenery, and up to Clarksville, Tennessee, to the Up and Smoke Cigar location where we did the meeting. And I rode with my friend Rachel and Levi. Actually met them in Robin Sage, where I was performing some duties, training the Special Forces soldiers, and they both assist with that also. So we ended up meeting, kicked it off. I learned about Rachel's story and her background in the Army and her life in general, also her husband's, and it really, I'm like, man, this has to be told. It's a perfect intro, first podcast for the Rambling Veteran. And her story just needs to be told, and the way that she's prevailed and overcame so much. This ride was cool. It was pretty freaking cold. I've had the bike. I'm a fair weather rider, so I haven't rode in a while. And took the bike out for the first time. It was probably 52 degrees. And on that bike, that cold just cut right through you. Ended up wearing a lot of layers, so it worked out pretty well. You can see we're going across the bridge right now. This is Ashland City, pretty close to Nashville. Beautiful scenic route, lots of turns, but if you're looking at moving to this location, just think about staying where you're at. We don't need anybody else. We like the open roads here. Levi's riding a Triumph there. It's a pretty unique bike. The horn is just absolutely hilarious. And then that's his wife, Rachel, in front, and she's got an old Dyna, kind of tricked out, and it kind of suits her style. It's like a purplish, goldish, like sparkly color, and her helmet matches too. So we had a lot of fun on that ride. Got stuck behind a cop most of the time on the trip, which kind of sucked, because of course you always want to gun it. And this dude lets us go, thank God. I'm going to be stuck behind him. But yeah, it worked out. The cop didn't, he was scooting. He was going like 65, so we were able to kind of get on it. Here's this sketchy work van in front of us with all these ladders, and they're like not even tied down. He just like stops and turns. No turn signal. Love it. So now we're cruising on into Clarksville, and we'll go ahead and prepare the intro for the Rambling Veteran, Episode 1. Welcome. Welcome to Episode 1 of the Rambling Veteran Podcast. We're in Clarksville, Tennessee at the Up and Smoke Cigar Lounge. My name is Micah Dunford, and this is my friend Rachel. Rachel.
Hello, Micah.
Welcome, sister. Good to have you.
Good to be here.
Right off the bat, to start us out, who is Rachel?
Can I light my cigar up for this one?
Absolutely, yeah.
Alright. I actually talked to my husband a little bit before answering that question, he told me I should start with my family,
Okay.
specifically my brother. So we're going to go back to well before I joined the Army. And my brother, so I was one of two siblings. I had an older brother, and he had cerebral palsy.
Okay.
And it was actually something a lot worse than cerebral palsy, but they didn't have a diagnosis for it, so cerebral palsy was the closest thing. So he couldn't walk, he really couldn't talk, and I grew up being the only person that could speak his language. I spoke Aryan, and that was sort of a unique childhood because I grew up as a partial caregiver. At least, most of the time I was there interpreting for him, helping out with going to the bathroom or feeding and everything like that. So it's very medically driven.
Mm-hmm.
I learned CPR when I was 7.
Oh my gosh. How and why?
To manage my brother's seizures in case his heart stopped during the seizure.
How often were his seizures?
He had a seizure every day.
Oh my goodness.
He didn't have grand mal or like the really crazy ones that you're probably thinking, but he'd have those, a grand mal maybe once a month, but he'd have the petite mals multiple times a day, which is where you just sort of zone out, stare off into space, and you're like, all right, just don't mess with them because you don't want him to cross over into a grand mal or something. I don't know, we're allowed to mess with him if he's having a petite mal.
This is completely foreign to me, honestly. I don't know much about it, so it's
Yeah, it's interesting, but that was my older brother.
So, I don't mean to interrupt, but how did you understand it and nobody else did?
Well, I grew up with him.
Mm-hmm.
So just like you learn a language naturally, I learned his language naturally. I just thought it was interesting that my parents couldn't understand him. I was like, he's saying he wants the purple blanket. How do you not understand this?
Mm-hmm.
It was just second nature to me because he was my brother and I saw him every day and I had been listening to him since I was a baby. So it was
You were attuned to it.
yeah, and what he needed and what he wanted. I loved my brother so much. Like we had typical sibling fights and stuff. He couldn't torment me in very many ways because of his disabilities, but
Like a brother typically does. Right?
yeah, well he could crawl, and when I was small, he would chase me around and bite me in the butt to torment me. So he could do that. I was like right at teeth level. So that was definitely a way he tormented me. But sadly, when my brother was 17 and I was 10, he passed away. He needed a long series of surgeries that his body was just too weak to handle. So I grew up in and out of hospitals and in and out of watching my brother go through serious medical crises. And so I was very familiar with the hospital system, probably more so than I should have been at my young age. But also I cared about people who were like my brother and couldn't take care of themselves. So in the midst of that, I was also homeschooled, which I would recommend to most people in a lot of circumstances, but in certain circumstances for me it wasn't great. My mother was fantastic. She did all of my schooling. She taught me how to read pretty young and then just dropped big school books in front of me, like, here's your work for this year.
Oh my gosh, really?
That's great.
Did you have to write reports after you read them, or?
No, she would usually just have to do a verbal report.
Okay, like a verbal download of what you read?
In fact, I only really remember doing math, like, on paper. I think I did workbooks. I had to have written something. But I started public school when I was in late middle school, so 8th grade. And my education went drastically downhill, but my social skills started stepping up a little bit.
That's always a trade-off, it seems like.
Yeah, it is. But a thing that came to light when I was in high school was how unhealthy our family dynamic was, because I finally had peers to compare my life to.
So you saw and heard the differences in the way their families were versus yours?
Yes. My father is, I would put it, mentally and emotionally unstable. And there's a lot of weird stuff I could get into with him, but he was abusive on several different levels, and I didn't understand how bad it actually was until I started talking to friends in school. I'm like, oh, your family's not like that?
That's not normal?
When I was in high school, about 16, my well, my brother died when I was 10, and when he died, my dad really lost his mind. He
Really?
went downhill, and I think they were murder attempts. He started cutting brake lines in their truck, or trying to cross the gas line with the starter, and for others to do rat poison in my orange juice.
Your own dad.
My own dad, yeah.
So did that, before we move, that's crazy. Was he close to your brother?
No.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Did he act like as a caregiver during that
No.
17 years?
My brother, for my dad's side of the family, was almost like a bar on the family name. Like he was an embarrassment because of the way he was born. In fact, his family told my dad that God was punishing him by giving him Aaron for marrying a Catholic. Right? So my brother was considered a punishment from God, and then when my mom became pregnant with me, everybody thought I'd be born the same way. My mother had lead poisoning when she was pregnant with Aaron, and she probably still had lead in her system during her pregnancy with me. So
How? That takes a lot of lead.
she worked in a lead factory.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
I'll explain it.
Logical.
But
So, what religion was your dad? If
So,
your mom was Catholic?
Lutheran.
Lutheran.
So Christian, but grew up in a Lutheran church. Yeah, I feel like the Lutheranism that I grew up with was somewhat different than the conventional understanding of Lutheranism.
Yeah, it sounds.
Yeah, it's a different. It's funny. I read a biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? And the Lutheran Church was obviously in Germany during the rise of the Third Reich.
Yeah, yeah.
And the Lutheranism that was practiced by my dad's side of the family seemed to be something more akin to the Church of Germany.
Okay.
I think that would explain it fairly adequately. So it wasn't. It wasn't what I believe now.
All right,
That
yeah.
way.
They brought their own little special touch to it.
Yeah, it had a.
But then after your brother passed,
My dad got crazier and a little bit more murdery,
and
and
you just noticed these things popping up that were detrimental. I mean, the brake lines
Oh.
cut, you said.
definitely. And he was asking my mom about life insurance policies and where they were located, and just like all these super suspect
Oh my
things.
goodness.
And one time it was pretty blatant. My dad drove this little tiny pickup truck, and one time me and my mom and my dad were all in it at the same time. We were parked in an intersection, and this semi truck started coming from the opposite direction, and my dad just like tore in front of it, and they had to slam on their brakes to not hit the side that my mom and I were on. So he was losing it.
Yeah,
He was really losing it.
gone.
So my mom and I left and lived in a battered women's shelter for about a month before we fled to another state to live with one of her brothers and my cousins. You know, kind of soft shelter with my mom's side of the family.
So you were in a local battered women's shelter, getting your feet on the ground, and then you fled out of state after a month?
Yeah.
Okay, and he wasn't looking for you?
That's why we went to the women's shelter first.
Okay.
Because we wouldn't have expected that. We wanted to give some time so that you could call all the relatives and friends, and they could honestly answer that they didn't know where we were.
Okay, and then he kind of hits a wall everywhere he goes, and eventually, hopefully, he stops looking.
Exactly.
All right.
So we fled to North Dakota, where my family was, and stayed there so I could finish up high school. This was all started during my junior year. We switched schools. I found out that I could graduate with 2 more credits, and graduated as a junior in North Dakota. So I took 2 more credits online, and I graduated high school when I was 16 years old.
Okay.
So now I'm 16, and my mom's trying to get a divorce in the state of Washington. Can't get one out of state, so we have to go back to Washington. So we get back there. I'm out of high school. I've got a diploma. Nobody will give me a job because I'm too young. Like, I'm applying everywhere.
You have to be 18,
I had to be 18 or have a letter from your high school superintendent in order to work, which I didn't have anymore. I was graduated. So I'd show people my diploma, and they just give me this like blank stare, like, no. And it was funny. I was pretty desperate. My mom had taken out a loan from one of my uncles in order for us to rent an apartment, but that money was running out. She was trying to go to school to get her own feet on the ground as well.
What was she attending?
She was doing medical assisting
Okay.
training. And I just had no options, and I didn't want to wait around for another 2 years to turn 18 in order to find work. Now, I had this little glimmer of hope. I thought I was going to work on a crab fishing boat up in Alaska.
That would be cool. I can see you doing that.
I could see it too. I had a court date and everything, and then like after the job interview, they called me back and like, how old are you again? I was like, "Dang it, I'm not going to get this job either."
I can imagine you too, just like 16-year-old young innocent girl in these like crazy waters in Alaska with this all male, ex-felon crew. God knows what they do, or how they ended up on a boat.
Well, it turns out my actual experience wasn't that different from the crab fishing boat, was it? So I was crashed out at a friend's house, and a recruiter called her, and she had no desire to join the Army, but I'm crashing on the couch, and she's like, well, I don't want to join. Talk to my friend Rachel. So she tosses me the phone, and I remember it like yesterday. Pick up the phone. I don't know what it is. It's like, this is Sergeant Gillespie of the United States Army. Have you given me thought to your future? And I'm like, I will join today. What do you need? What do you need me to do? Yeah. I was like, let's do this. This is a job that I could do.
You wasn't expecting that, and that's so not typical.
Mm-hmm. So I went home. I told my mom about it. She was excited because she wanted to join the Army when she was younger, but couldn't because of health problems.
Okay.
So my mom was very supportive. And I actually had to gain weight to join the Army back then.
Did you really?
I did. Because we weren't buying a lot of food. We didn't have a lot of money. I was walking everywhere to try to find a job, and I got pretty daggone skinny.
Were people helping you all during the time, like churches or?
No. It was strange. My dad had a way of making us look very crazy, so that people were really sympathetic to his plight and how awful we were. So they took all of our friends from where we originally lived and turned them against us.
Okay.
I lost pretty much all my friends in high school, and even close family friends, and we couldn't go to the churches that we went when I was still living there because then my dad would be able to find us. And he actually found us anyway a few times. And we were living in Spokane at the time. Most of it just ran away. Yeah, just ran.
Because if he's hunting you down over that distance and that time, God knows what he wanted. I mean, it probably wasn't going to be healthy.
No, it's definitely not. And he actually still hunts me down to this day. He finds me. And it's usually to send me some super long, creepy letter. Like 10 pages of, I don't even, like, you have blood running through your veins, it's mine, and come back to the fold. And kind of cryptic. And also telling me I'm probably going to hell, even though he hasn't seen me since I was 16 and doesn't even know who I am at this point. But it gets weird really quick with my dad.
Yeah, so it's probably healthy just to stay away from that.
Yeah, that's been my philosophy. I made a mistake and sent him a letter one time that it was actually pretty nice. It was like, I'm sorry if I ever hurt you. Please leave me alone. Don't send me any more letters. And then the letters just started coming more frequently and it became more tenacious. So I haven't done that again. The best philosophy I have is to just run away. I don't think he's physically tried to come after me since I joined the Army.
But he definitely has a gap and a longing to know you. And so cool.
I don't think that's what it is. No. I think he'd be kinder if that's what it was.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So did the Army let you join then, or?
Yeah. I had to get both my parents to sign because I was 17. I had just turned 17 when Sergeant Gillespie called me.
That's the cutoff, right?
That's the cutoff. You can join at 17 if your parents sign.
Scary.
So my mom signed, no problem. Somehow, either my recruiter, I don't know what he did to get my dad's signature, but he got my dad's signature. Might have been because we didn't have to pay child support anymore if he signed. So
there's an incentive.
It's an incentive. But I signed up to be a combat medic, and off I went to boot camp, and that was in 2003.
2003, so the beginning of the Iraq War, before it or after?
It was sort of, we were in the Iraq War already. I think Saddam Hussein was captured while I was in boot camp.
Okay, interesting. Right, so March 20th, I think, was when we invaded.
Yeah.
For sure. So you're 17, you're my age, you join. Why did you choose to be a combat medic?
So the way I grew up, I felt like a victim. And I've kind of wanted to join the Army. Like, it was like a bell going off. Like, I could be stronger there. I can prove something to myself in the Army. I can take care of myself. I don't have to run away and be a victim anymore. I thought that I could gain resilience by joining the Army. And I think I did. I definitely think I did do that.
It's probably inarguable.
Yeah.
Now, as a medic, you saw that as the avenue to doing that, or what?
I did, and I saw it two ways. One, I was fascinated with healthcare. I had my brother. I was always fascinated, maybe in almost a callous way. When we went to North Dakota, I stayed with my uncle Mark, not an awful lot, and he was a farmer.
Okay.
And so I got to help with a little bit of veterinary stuff around the farm, and they were also a hunting family. And honestly, I was kind of fascinated how cutting dead things open.
Were you?
Like, these things are really cool. I like the way the body works, and I was like, wow, I was fascinated with anatomy and physiology.
Which probably ties in, and I don't mean to interrupt, but like the butchering, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, among other things I've done.
But you were just enthralled. You're like, wow, this is
Yeah, I was
interesting.
like, this is really cool.
How it all works.
Well, and as a female, I wanted to get as close to the front lines as I could. I wanted to become combat tested. That's
Really?
what I wanted. I wanted, if there was a fight, I wanted to be in it.
Why?
Why? To prove something to myself, to prove that I could do it. And it kind of played into that becoming stronger idea that I had for myself and for my future.
Okay. Do you think that that is inherent in most females? Because I know it's inherent in most males. Like young males go fight wars. I mean, that's what they do, right? But women, that's definitely less common.
I don't think it's inherent. I think it's common,
Mm-hmm.
but I was a little bit disappointed when I was in boot camp because there was a bunch of other females and they all had the same job I did.
Yeah.
And I remember this one girl I was in there with, she came up with her own cadence for marching, and it had something to do with never going to shoot my rifle, it's just for decoration, just for decoration.
Oh,
And she kept saying it.
gosh.
And I was looking around, I was like, dang, did I pick the wrong job? Like, do these women know something I don't know about their job? And I'm just going to be like wiping butts and changing sheets or something?
And they let her say that as a cadence.
Oh, it was joking. It wasn't in front of the drill sergeant.
Okay,
So it was just when we
okay.
were all by ourselves.
I was going to say, in infantry training, I don't think they would have let us do that.
Well, I discovered that she was wrong very quickly.
Yeah, like,
So,
you're in the Army.
yeah, I did boot camp, then I did AIT, and then I went to 3rd Infantry Division. Was my very first assignment.
Where was that located?
Fort Benning, Georgia.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Okay, how'd you like it?
I loved it. I was a dog-faced soldier. That was my first assignment. And when I got to my unit wasn't there. Oh, this is a funny story about getting to my unit first. Somehow, on all of the rosters, they had me as a male, and my name is Richard, not Rachel.
This is from North Dakota, MEPS, all the way to Fort Benning?
This was actually Spokane, Washington. So we had to move back to Washington for the divorce.
Okay.
But
So they messed it up in Washington.
yeah, somewhere. There was something up somewhere along the line.
You look like Richard.
I do look like a Richard. Explains why everybody calls me Sir when I go through the gate on post all the time.
You're right, my long blonde ponytail.
It's my truck, actually. It looks like a Sir's truck.
That's fair, yeah.
But anyway, so I get to Fort Benning, and I get dropped off, and I'm at like one of those little smoking shacks that they have.
Okay, yeah.
And there's me and like 3 other people from reception, and all getting dropped off at this unit. And then the commander and first sergeant pulled a formation, and they start screaming for everybody, like, hey, new guys, jump the shit, come over this way. So, pick up and run. And I'm standing in the back of the formation with the other new guys, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, one of these things is not like the other. I'm the only female. I'm the only female in this entire formation. And so, in the middle of the commander's brief, I'm just like, and he starts cussing, and he's like, what are you?
It's totally confused.
He's so baffled. And he's like, no, absolutely not. You get your stuff, go to the S1. I was like, okay, so I grab my duffel bag and go sit in the S1. And they start pulling my packet or whatever, and they're like, this says your name is Richard. I'm like, no. And it also says you're a male. I'm like, still, no, also no, I'm female. So same day, I got moved to the Ford Support Battalion where the females were.
Okay. So what was the rationale behind that, though? I mean, like, weren't allowed to be in that training.
I got sent to an infantry unit.
Straight up.
Straight up infantry unit.
Okay.
They sent me to the infantry.
All right. So yeah.
This is 2003.
Yeah. For whoever doesn't know, I mean, this happened when Rachel and I were serving. Gosh, what do you say? Probably around 2014, 15-ish, where like we really started to include women officially.
Yep.
So it's a relatively new thing. It was a big push. So she's a progenitor of that. You're welcome, guys.
Yeah, I was one of the forerunners of all this.
But it's interesting. I mean, that's 2003. I mean, we had women that fought in Vietnam, every war ever, right? And still, 2003, we're debating, this topic. It's absolutely crazy. But
well, I have some interesting insights on. I actually fall on. I'm not going to get into it yet. We're going to get into it a little bit later.
That's fair. All right.
But I got sent to the FSB, and they weren't there. They
Forward
were
Sport Battalion?
Yes,
Okay.
Forward Sport Battalion, and they were at JRTC already, getting ready to go to Iraq. JRTC, Readiness Training Center in Louisiana.
Yeah.
So I got issued my TA-50 and all my equipment. I got issued a barracks room, and then I got put on a C-130 and got sent to Louisiana to join my unit.
Really?
Yep.
By bird.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. So
was anybody on there with you? Or?
Oh yeah, I spent a few people in, but cool experience too. They dropped a Bradley from the back of the bird I was in.
And you were watching it.
And this was my first military flight too.
You're like, we're just doing this all the time.
It was terrifying because that bird is going, and the Bradley drops and it's like, whoop.
Really?
It's an experience.
Because what does a Bradley weigh? I mean, God,
Too much.
Yeah, too much.
But it did JRTC, and then within a couple months after that, I was on my way to Iraq.
All right.
Which, that's a life-changing experience.
It's what you wanted, right?
Yeah, it's what I wanted. It's definitely not what I expected. Especially I didn't know what to do with everybody telling me I was a medic and I was female, so I wasn't really even doing anything over there. So I had already kind of dialed back my expectations of what combat was going to look like for myself.
Okay.
But
so yeah, I mean, this whole period of like joining the military, waiting, all the hurry and wait crap, going through the training, in the back of your head, I mean, you don't know what you're dealing with. You know you're going to war.
Yeah.
Saddam Hussein got captured and we're fighting it out, right, on the highways. Tanks are introduced, right, thunder runs and all that. So you have all this in this young 17-year-old head. I mean, that's a lot.
It was a lot. And then, we land in Kuwait, we get our unit together, we do a bunch of training. And I have another funny story that kind of started putting me towards the front lines, I guess. And we were at a range. And
In Kuwait?
Yeah, in Kuwait, just qualifying prior to, and I think we were doing like some reflexive fire exercises.
Okay.
And I was shooting, and I had my vest on, the plates in it, and some hot grass ended up going down my back and under the plate, and the plate just pressed it in.
It'll wake you up.
Yeah. But I actually did something impressive, which landed me a reputation. I kept shooting, and I kept hitting my target while yelling for somebody to get the brass out of my back.
Oh, hell yeah.
My platoon sergeant saw me, and he was like, she's my driver. I want her to be my driver. So that's how I became an LMTV driver into Iraq. Yeah.
Lock in.
Yep.
That's good. Wow.
Yeah.
I can see that 100 miles away. Yeah, that's just your personality as a soldier.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah. Definitely.
Well,
Because everybody knows who's had that happen. I mean, it's not fun, but you just freaking suck it up and go.
yeah, it's just pain. You're not going to die from it.
Yeah.
I had this epic bullet-shaped scar on my back for years.
Really?
It's gone now. I wish it was still there.
I used to have some here from the 240s.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you get that pile just racking up right there, and it'll eventually, once it gets so big, it'll just start kicking up towards you,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a 240 gunner for a while, too. I got dinged by a couple of those things.
Keeps you lively.
It does. Keeps you alert. So
Going to Iraq.
We're going into Iraq, and one of the first, it was such a weird experience driving from Kuwait into Iraq. Because at first I didn't really see people at all, or villages. It's just desert and flat.
That whole southern trip all the way up to Baghdad.
That was just
basically.
nothingness. You could see like some oil refineries and flames in the distance.
Way off
there. And then we stopped for a night in this place that reminded me straight up Mad Max. Like it was just tin that made a wall and piles of tires.
Really?
We just slept in the back of the LMTV under the tarp and then kept rolling. We didn't get a lot of sleep on that trip. But then the next day, when and we leave Mad Max facility number 1. We're on the road, and I see a little girl on the side of the road, and she's up in the distance, and there's nobody around. There's no vehicles, there's no village, there's no house. We're at an overpass, and a little girl, she must have been 5, just standing on the side of the road. And as we got close and noticed that she was holding her hand like this and just crying, just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And we got over there, and just blood was running all the way down her arm. And right next to her was a bag of plastic explosives. So somebody was probably hiding under the overpass waiting for us to stop and help her, because they probably chopped off her fingers so that they could blow us up. So
Because they know that any human with a heart on earth is going to stop, right? Especially us. And then what do you guys do?
Nothing. We kept rolling.
What did that do to you, 17-year-old Rachel?
I was devastated, but I knew why we didn't stop. It took me a while to understand that the plastic bag behind her was a bag of explosives. And I think my platoon sergeant was with me, and I asked him, and he explained to me what they had done and what they were doing to try to get us to stop. And he's like, I know, we can't. So I just took the pain and the horror of the whole thing and I put it somewhere else so I could keep driving.
Yeah, bottle it up,
Yep.
drive on the mission.
We're not going to think about that right now.
But then eventually you do.
Yeah.
Okay.
You think about it all the time. It's kind of like resurfaces when you don't want it to.
Yeah.
But we got hit by 2 IEDs before we made it to our destination. Luckily, nobody got hurt. Had one vehicle go down, repaired it en route, made it to our destination, which was Bob Warhorse. And I thought it was really funny. We had light discipline back then, so at night there was no lights on in the Bob. So we rolled up into this big compound in complete and utter darkness. But it was weird because it was right by a village that all had their lights on. I was like, yo, this ain't Brigadier, and it's not like it vanishes at night or something. Like they just aim for the big dark spot.
The only one not lit up.
Yeah, it's the only one not lit up.
Did you have to wear PT belts?
No, not yet.
Oh, not yet. Okay,
Not
okay.
deployment.
You know what I'm talking
We weren't
about.
at that level of stupid yet.
It was building gradually.
Yeah, it got worse.
We learned we weren't fighting a real war. We were just siphoning billions of dollars off to companies ran by politicians. So over time, it got ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, initially when I got there, I worked at the aid station or a level 1 trauma center and rotated between working there, just running sick call, and eventually responding to mass cows. And
What's up, Masco?
mass casualty incident. So we were the closest for the Bakuba region for a level 1 trauma center. So besides whatever care guys were getting actually out on the mission from their medic, we were the next stop before they got evacuated to a higher echelon, which was usually Anaconda, and from there they'd go to Germany or the United States.
So you were a part of that. Did you start to see people trickle in with combat injuries?
I did, but not. It was very surreal when it started because we did a lot of rehearsals first. We did fake mass towel mock-ups where they would put some moulage or dress somebody up to make them look like they're injured, spray some fake blood on them, or put like a plastic mauled hand on them, or like a fake. We used to blow up these little balloons and draw them like eyeballs, like to make their eyeballs fly. We did a lot of weird stuff in the medical field to make it look like an injury or simulated injuries.
Which is probably invaluable though when it actually happens, right?
Back then, no, the laws wasn't very good. It was a good test of systems and flow, but for actual treatment, you cannot simulate actual treatment of a human unless you're actually working on a human or other things that were living ones.
Yeah, very, very similar. Because when you see that little child on the side of the bridge holding her arm that her fingers were cut off or whatever, you see this guy that just got blown up, there's no rational thought with them. That's the precipice for them. That's the end.
Yeah.
This girl thinks she's dying on the side of the road. She probably is, right? This guy who got blown up, he's in pure survival instinct. So there's no way. I agree. When you can train all you want, but then you initially see that and just mass confusion and chaos and the noise, the smell.
Yeah.
The person's just frantic. Their heart rate's up at 180 or whatever, clawing at you, fighting you.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
quite
in
crazy.
medicine, itself. Like, you can slap a bandage on plastic all day long, and it's not like trying to stop bleeding on an actual artery. It's completely different, and you have to do it very differently. And the only way you get good at it is by actually doing it. So we did like 5 or 6 mass cal exercises before the first one. But there was no difference between the spin up for everybody. Like, they wake you up or come grab you if it's during the day.
And you didn't know?
I didn't know the first time I had
Oh,
it.
wow.
And our simulations, they would land a helicopter and we'd go grab fake casualties or load them back on a bird or load them off of trucks coming from the line. We did all this during our simulations. So the first time I grabbed a litter, I just grabbed the litter as we're doing like mission mode, right? Grab litter, go into the aid station. Once we got into the aid station, I put the litter down and an arm rolled off the litter. And I looked at it and it was an actual arm. And it was like everything just stopped. Like everything, I don't know if you've had that experience where sound gets kind of muffled.
Oh,
Everything
yeah.
just goes real, like I could hear the helicopters in the background, like, and then slowly everything kind of comes back and hits you and it speeds back up. And I was like, that's an alarm. Put it back on the litter and got him in the trauma bay.
It was his arm?
It was his arm.
Okay, well, at least hopefully it got back on there. I don't know.
I don't know either. Level 1, our only job was to stabilize the patients and then get them back. And from where I was, and I think one of my biggest frustrations as a medic is there's a lot of people I think about and I don't know what happened to them. I don't know if they lived, I don't know if they died. You know, I put them on, they were alive when I put them on a helicopter, and that's the last I heard or found out.
That has to be really tough too, because you associate, like, this is a living being, right? He's making eye contact with me, right? In and out or whatever. Same stuff, perhaps.
Yeah.
He or she, and then they're just gone, and you're like, what happened, you know?
Yeah.
Did he have a family? Did he have a mom and
Yeah.
dad?
And you see the little signs of it, right? Like, you see the pictures, you see the wedding rings, you see, or them, if they're with it, sometimes, you know, grabbing your hand, like, tell my wife I love her, tell my kids, blah, blah, blah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's hard. But that was my first mass cal, and it was a doozy.
How many?
We had 3 in the trauma bay where I started working, and then we had 2 expected, which means they were going to die. And I don't even know how many were urgent. But in the trauma bay, we had 2, then we had 1 American soldier, we had 1 Iraqi police officer, and then we had this little bitch that blew everybody up. He lived
Alive.
and we're working on him. I didn't want to work on him, so I started helping with the U.S. soldier first. But he didn't make it. He had a horrible, horrible spinal injury, and he died on that table. And when he died, I moved over and I started helping with the Iraqi police officer who had inguinal bleed. Like, his hip was blown out, and he was just squirting blood out of that. And I just remember holding pressure on that, and then he needed an X-ray, so we got that pressure held. But then I had to move out of the way for the X-ray, and I slipped on some blood on the floor, and I fell on the floor right by the insurgents, is what we called them at the time.
Yeah.
And this is the most horrific scene that I remember from that war. One of them, at least, is his face was partially blown off, like his lower jaw wasn't attached anymore. But he looked down at me and started laughing.
Just pure evil.
Evil. Luckily, thank God, I was frozen with anger, like shock. I'm not sure, but everything in me wanted to just flip that litter over and kill him at that very moment, but I couldn't move. And I think one of the doctors that was in there just saw that I was just frozen. So he sent me out to take care of the two patients that were going to die.
How did you guys know that was the suicide bomb?
Because he still had some of the bomb remnants strapped to him.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So he's in there, oh my gosh. And it was probably Al Qaeda, AQI.
Yeah.
At
He
that
died
point.
as well. It didn't take long after that. His injuries, as you can imagine, were pretty catastrophic, having had a bomb strapped to you.
You had a vest on.
I'm not sure what it was exactly. It was like a pile of hamburger and wires, and somehow he was still alive, and it was kind of like unbelievable that he was still with it enough to laugh at anybody.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing. Your jaw is, you just try to kill yourself. You're in this foreign, hospital, level 1 facility. You're looking around and you see you fall, and he has the cognitive ability to sit there and laugh. It's just pure evil.
It's crazy. And I don't even know how he even hit the target. He might have even been in a V-bid. I don't know. All I know is I was told he was the one, and I believed it. But I went to take care of the 2 patients that were expectant, and they had full body burns. And at the time, my training wasn't enough. Like, knowing what I know now in medicine, there were probably things I could have done to help maybe save their life, or at least relieve some suffering. But at that point, I knew nothing. So I had 2 patients that had full body burns, and the only thing I could do was hold their hand and give them morphine while they died. And I was still 17, and it was horrible. That was probably the worst mass cal that I remember, or maybe I just remember it because it was my first. But we had lots of mass cals. And
did you stay at that level 1 facility, or did you move up with the infantry as they moved?
I moved later, so I was still with the FSC at the time, and that's why we were at a clinic. But later on, they asked for female volunteers to go with the infantry, but more specifically with infantry and a QRF team. They needed a medic, and they needed female medics. Found out later, there was Operation Lioness that some people are fairly familiar with, that they started years before this. And so this was kind of a part of that, where they took a couple females because they needed females to treat Muslim women and to arrest Muslim women and to go with all the line units out into combat. So if those opportunities popped up, they had somebody there that could do it without offending anyone.
Okay. And this is the very beginning of this whole movement, and that's something that we saw, and you were in the Army before I was, but something as we saw even later when I joined, that like you lock down some women in a house or whatever, and you're like, okay, now what, right? Who do we address first?
Yeah.
What do we do with them? So even then, years later, we're still dealing with that, and at that point, we started instituting like the female engagement teams and all that.
I found it honestly started at the beginning of the war.
Yeah, really?
Like, Operation Lioness has its own documentary out there. You can watch it,
Really?
and it talks about the first women that did it, and they were attached to Marine Corps units for the most part. And that created its own problems too, because we speak a different language in the Army than the Marine Corps.
That's very true. Very true.
When you're in a tactical situation, that can be incredibly dangerous, not speaking the same language. So that's a pretty interesting thing to watch too.
It sounds crazy, but it's the truth. Yeah, when you're around them, they have a whole different vernacular. So do we.
Yeah, we do. But I ended up being a medic. Me and my friend Penny, she volunteered as well. So we were roommates, and the 2 females, we had to move to an entirely different fob. And we were staying with a field artillery unit. We were working on their clinic and then cycling through missions. So it could be anybody. It was field artillery, it was infantry, it was QRF. And if they needed one of us, we'd just take turns and run missions with them.
Okay. So you got a lot of action.
Yeah, I actually got a new call sign on that trip. They started calling me Jinx.
Jinx, why?
Because every mission I went on would get hit. Every single one.
Oh, gosh.
In fact, it was so
That's not a good
consistent.
nickname.
It was so consistent that some units refused to take me with them.
Really?
Like, we don't want her. It was bad, but yeah. So I got quite a bit of combat on that trip.
Were you able to talk to your family when you were deployed? Who did you rest on? Like, how did you handle that first deployment?
Back then, you remember this, like you had phone booths set up in these like little plywood huts,
Okay.
and you'd have to buy a phone card, right? And it was an international phone card, so it was like 1,000,000 digits long. Like you'd spend 5 minutes just dialing the number, and then you'd mess up a number, hang up the phone, like start again, and you only had like 5 minutes to talk anyway. So,
yeah, and they were decently expensive.
Yeah.
The ones you had to pay for.
Oh, they were super expensive. And then you had hope. You just hoped that your family member would actually pick up the phone at this point.
Right, because Iraq, I think, is a 9-hour difference or something. It's something like that.
Yeah, it was something squirrely. And it was always in some weird time of day you had to call because it had to be after a mission or before a mission.
Mhm.
Yeah, and those cars were really expensive.
Was it just balls of wall at that point, or were you guys running strictly night missions or anything like
It was
that?
balls to the wall. We did night missions, day missions, which is why it was nice to have Penny because we alternated.
Okay.
So if one of us wasn't on missions, we were working in the clinic and had a little bit more regular of a schedule. But it's actually where I started smoking cigars, was with the field artillery.
Really?
I got to my room, and well, Penny and I got to our room, and there was this huge box of Swisher Sweets. It was like a crate of Swisher Sweets. And it's like, well, we can give them away, or we're starting smoking. And I realized at this point that in order to be a medic with an all-male unit, you need to adjust your behaviors a little bit just to get them to warm up to you. And I found tobacco was a great way to do it. So I started smoking cigars and dipping.
This is before vaping, guys.
Yeah,
So
it was before
we got dip, cigars, cigarettes, maybe hookah.
But it was perfect. Like, you just throw a cigar in your mouth and light up, and they're like, "Oh, she's cool." And then they'd calm down and they'd stop acting like, because they were nervous to have a female around. They were very scared of offending me, and so I took on a very bad potty mouth. I would just start telling all the worst jokes that I had heard somewhere else. Like, what's the most horrible, dirty joke I've ever heard? I'm gonna tell it, and I'm gonna start cussing a lot and smoking a lot. But then the guys, like, for me as a medic, I need them to be comfortable enough with me to tell me their medical problems.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had an alcoholic out on my team who was going through DTs on missions.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I need to know stuff like that.
Yeah, were you Christian at that time, like your upbringing?
So my upbringing in the Lutheran church, I believed in God. I can't say I was walking the walk, though. I never committed my life to Christ at that point. It wasn't actually until much later that I gave my life over to Christ and actually started understanding what that meant. But at the time, I had this idea of cheap grace. I believe there's a God. I believe Jesus Christ died for my sins, but, you know, he loves me no matter what I do, and he'll forgive me for it.
Yeah, I was wondering if the cussing and trying to fit in was like a moral conundrum for you, but you're probably still trying to figure yourself out.
I was trying to figure myself out, and I really didn't care that much. It was like, it was a survival activity for me. Like, I need to find a way to make it.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had to do that many times in life.
I have. And I did it really well there. I think I did quite well. I was a good medic at the time. And yeah, we went through a lot though, especially as the QRF team. We went through a whole lot. We lost several guys on that trip, which is actually how I became a 240. No, I was a 50 cal gunner for Iraq. I became a 50 cal gunner
You
during
got promoted.
I got promoted because our 50 cal gunner, we were going underneath an overpass where they had started planting the IEDs underneath them, and they would blast down, and so he got his torso ripped off, and I took his place.
Yeah, they would have guys on the bridges, and we would always have to change our tactics, you know, the speed, direction, and what you would do under the bridge.
Yeah,
you know.
enter the side, exit the side, so using maniacal maneuvers so you weren't predictable.
Little bastards, they'd bring, the Iranians were involved, and they would bring these bombs, these mines, and have like a fishing line, and they would drop them they would call their buddies on one side and be like, hey, lane 3, and they'd have a guy over here, and he'd drop it into the turret and try to kill the gunners. I remember that. It was
horrible.
So and that's the interesting thing is like, you know, we always said, okay, well, women shouldn't fight in combat. It was a big thing that we were talking about politically in America. But the funny thing to us is like, women are always in combat. I mean, every deployment I've ever been on, I've been in combat with women.
But simultaneously, on those missions, because I was a female, the guys I was with, and it's good and bad, they were very, very protective of me. Very protective. Like, there was a couple times where our trucks would get shot at or something, we'd have to dismount and engage. And if I was going to respond to a casualty, all of a sudden my whole team had a 360 around me. And I was like, do your job. Like, I'm fine, let me do my job. You do your job.
Like you're a
Stop worrying about me. And, oh man, my guys were always trying to pick fights with guys that were looking at me wrong, and the other defag or something. Why are you looking at her?
It's natural.
Which is nice, right? But you have to appreciate that, but simultaneously it can be really disruptive of the mission. Well, I never dealt with this, but I actually know a married couple that were on missions together, and she died.
Oh my
Her
goodness.
husband watched her die. And how, I mean, when you're just, I mean, it's horrible when someone you know and love in your team dies, but when it's your spouse,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you can carry on a mission after that. Oh.
Truly, yeah, I can't think, yeah.
And interestingly enough, having responded to mass melts, I'll never forget the first female casualty that came across a table in a trauma bag. The doctors didn't know what to do. Everybody froze. Like, they started ripping clothes off. I'm like, it's a female. Like, people started shaking and freaking out. Like, they were so upheaved at the idea that this woman had been so gravely injured.
Was it an American?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So there's that psychology in men that I think is naturally protective of women. They
Yes.
care that they're your mother, they're your sister, they're your wife. And it's worse when a woman gets hit on the male psychology around you than when a male gets hit.
Like she's a caretaker or whatever.
Yeah, and I saw that a lot. They're hyper concerned about where I was, what I was doing. Was I okay? When they really needed to be focusing on what they were doing. But that's not a quality you want to destroy in men either. But that's where I'm kind of, I have mixed feelings about women in combat roles, having been in lots of combat roles. But that's Iraq.
That's trip number one. So you get
trip
back.
number one.
You get back, and how'd you deal with life?
So coming back was pretty horrible. It was probably the worst. It's where my mental health took a swan dive. And my mental health really started taking a swan dive on one particular mission where I was a 50 cal gunner and we were getting shot at from a crowd. And, guys were on the gun trucks in front of me and behind me, but two guys were charging the convoy from the crowd with AK-47s pointed at them. Actually, they were pointed at the truck in front of me. And I'm on a 50. And I needed to shoot them. And one was an older man, probably 40s, seemed old at the time, and a teenage boy.
So you can tell as they're coming, you're like,
I can see them, I see where they're aiming, and they don't see them, but I do, because they're kind of at my angle, but they're aiming diagonal. And so I shot both of them with a 50, which is pretty horrific. Yeah, pink mist. And that turned into recurring nightmares. Like, every night after that, I started dreaming that people on my own team were in front of that 50 cal. Like, all of a sudden, I just pulled the trigger and I blew up somebody on my team, or somebody from the United States and my family. And, like, my brain just couldn't wrap itself around killing two people like that. And a teenage boy, no less. He was aiming a gun at my friends, but I never really did get over having to kill those two.
yeah, still, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, I still see them. So I got back, I was struggling with my mental health, and I didn't mention this, when I was younger I had developed very horrible coping mechanisms with my childhood, and I was a cutter. I used to cut myself, and I didn't do it after I joined the Army, and then that happened, and I got back. They sent me and the QRF team home early because we had such a rough trip. So, like, let's let them go home on Advon for the advance party. And so we got back, and we were just drinking and spending way too much time drinking.
All right, so welcome back. We had to take a short little hiatus. We were talking about Rachel returning back from her first deployment. You were 17 still?
I turned 18. I turned 18 in Iraq.
In Iraq?
In Iraq.
How was that birthday?
I don't remember. I do remember. I taught a platoon of Georgian Army soldiers how to drive a 113.
Georgia,
The Republic of Georgia.
Why were they involved?
I had no idea. They were all over our fob, though. I pulled guard duty with Georgians quite a bit, too. Didn't speak a lick of English, so for those that don't know, a 113 is like a miniature medical tank with no gun.
Okay.
So I had to teach them how to drive them, and it was a terrifying experience.
Really? They were part of the NATO force, I guess?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I remember they tried to sell it as this big joint, allied mission and everything, and then you looked at the actual numbers, the force numbers, and it'd be like 200 people from Jordan, 100 people from Latvia, 200 from Sweden. It's like, yeah, we have this multi-coalition or whatever they wanted to call it.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I ended up working with them quite a bit, at least on guard duty and then that whole training session. But it was like, I guess it was about 8 of them that were all packed in the back of that little mini tank with me. And there was the language barrier. And once they got behind that, or in the driver's seat, I was just in for a ride that I needed to survive somehow because they did not listen to my lesson. They're just going to take that thing everywhere.
It's
pretty funny. That was my birthday.
That was your birthday?
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty.
It was memorable. But yeah, I got back from that trip on Advon, like I was saying before, because QRF had a pretty ugly trip. We lost 2 guys, and just the whole command team, they're like, just send them home early. But we didn't really have any NCO supervision when we got back, so we had almost a month before everyone else got there of nothing to do.
The main body until they return?
Mm-hmm. And so we drank. We drank a lot. Drinking and partying.
You were living in the bees,
yeah, I was living in the bees. So a lot of barracks parties. I remember vomiting on someone's car over a balcony. And I also remember being in the line at the DFAC one morning and somebody showing me a video on their phone of me getting drugged down a hallway by my hair on a skateboard. I was like, is that from last night? He was like, yeah. I was like, I don't remember that. Huh.
That's why my scalp hurts.
Yeah, I explained some stuff, but it's weird.
Yeah, you never know the true extremities of life until you go to a army barracks party. That's for sure.
Yeah. But all of us had such a rough trip that we were just clearly trying to drink it away.
Yeah.
Like, it was funny, the things we were doing, but it was coming from a pretty painful place. And I was having such a hard time coping with those guys that I killed that I started cutting again. And one night, I cut a little too deep. So I got a big gash on my side.
Oh, not even on your arm?
No, I usually cut where people couldn't see.
Yeah.
Although when I was a kid, you didn't want to cause questions, right? I wasn't doing it for attention. When I was a kid, I did it for a couple of different reasons. One was I almost thought of it as like pain inoculation. Like if I could deal with physical pain, I could deal with emotional pain. And then there are other reasons I did it, and I'm not advocating any of it, but this is sort of my rationale. And a lot of women are cutters,
Really?
And men are starting to do it increasingly as well.
I've heard
Very
that more
strange.
women are than men.
Yeah, it's definitely, men burden themselves more.
Mm.
And I saw this when I worked at BEPS, which was much later in my career. I actually got to pull data on that behavior, which was fascinating. But I did it when I felt numb inside so that I could feel something. And I did it when I felt too much inside so that I could control it and feel what I felt on the inside and the outside. And there was something sort of relieving about it. And that turned into my coping mechanism when I was a kid. But when I first joined the Army, I didn't feel like I was too busy to have anything to cope with. But now there's this lull, right? And now I've had all this combat trauma on top of childhood trauma.
And it's just piling
And
on.
it's just piling up, and so I started again. And one night I cut too deep, and I was actually scared of bleeding to death.
On your side.
On my side. I don't think I would have, but it was bad. It was really, really bad. And at the time, I had one friend in the barracks, really, really great guy. Trusted him. He was a Christian, but I didn't want to call him. I had a crush on his roommate, who had a lot of his own issues. He was struggling with alcohol, and he wasn't a good person to call, but I felt like because he had his own issues that he wouldn't judge me. So I called him. He was drunk when he came over, and he took one look at me, and I'm bleeding, like there's blood everywhere. I'm probably pale. And he looks at me, and like something washed over him. Like he lost all of his humanity in one moment, and he raped me and left me a puddle of my blood to die.
Oh my God.
Worst night of my life. I woke
This is the guy
up.
you called for help.
I called for help. Yeah. He did not help.
He was like a shark in the worst sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So the next morning, I woke up alive, still stuck to the tile floor because my blood had dried at that point. And I woke up because my phone was kind of laying on the floor across from me and it was buzzing. And it was my platoon sergeant letting me know that we were in summer PTs now, not winter PTs, which we've been wearing.
Well, important, thank you. We needed that to drive on with the day.
Well, it was significant for this situation because I'd cut in places that would show in summer PTs.
Oh, I got you.
So all of a sudden, I'm going to get outed, right? So I call her really quick and I tell her I need to talk to her, like now. I said nothing to anyone about the rape. And the reason I didn't say anything is because I already had a reputation for being a little bit crazy. And he was the brigade soldier of the year.
Oh my god.
He was like your rock star in the brigade. So I was like, they're not going to believe me. And to this day, even at this point in my career, as I look back, I still don't think anybody would have believed me.
Do you think that's common?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
One, that women don't report it,
Yeah, that's very common.
and then two, that it's not taken seriously.
Correct. And three, that it's usually kind of the unit rock star that is doing it.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you've seen.
That's what I've seen.
Yeah, that's intense and it's hard to hear.
Yeah. But I did tell my platoon sergeant about the cutting. So I ended up admitted to a psychiatric ward at Martin Army Community Hospital at Fort Benning for almost a month. It didn't help. While I was there, I just learned the right things to say to get out of there.
Yeah, so did they care about actually treating you and like...
They shoveled drugs down my throat.
They give you drugs, right?
Drugs.
Which is a traditional, at least Army, I don't know about the military in whole, I would venture to say it's probably the same, but that's the Army's answer to everything. I counted my drugs at one point for the various ailments, you know, that you have or whatever, and I think I had 13 or 15.
Yeah, that's
And
about what it was too.
Guy next to me, he's a 160th medic at one point, so he was just as keen on that stuff as you, and he was telling me, he's like, Micah, there's no doctor on earth that can tell you these 15 pill bottles, how they all interact with each other and your specific body, you know, on a day-to-day basis. If you were to take this for a year, no doctor on earth can tell you what the result will be to your mid, long-term health.
Yeah.
Mental health, physical health, whatever. They can't.
No. It's like once you exceed 4 medications, you're in a program known as polypharmacy, where there's no knowing. Like all the drug studies that exist are for 4 or fewer medication interactions.
Really?
Yep.
I did not know that at all.
Once you get enrolled into polypharmacy, it's kind of like a crapshoot, right? Like, I don't know, maybe it's from the meds.
Yeah, there's too many things going on.
Way
to
too
tell.
many. Yeah. But when you deal with psychiatric medications too, at that time, all the ones they put me on in the hospital, I had adverse reactions to. One, every time I stood up, I'd pass out.
Oh gosh.
One of them made me, I don't know what it was that they put me on, but I curled up into a ball and I clawed holes in my own arms, like just scratching.
Jeez.
And I don't remember doing it.
Are these SSRIs or what were
I
they?
don't even remember what I was on a lot of different medications, and I was so fed up with just these cycles of medications that I just started faking swallowing them. I started spitting them out, and then I decided to just gradually increase my positivity and outlook on life when I was communicating with my therapist. And like that was the key, right? Go in, be a mess, level it up, and then have hope and optimism for the future.
Okay.
If you can articulate that, they'll discharge you.
Gives you a little bit of light at that tunnel. It's like, okay, I can get out now.
Yeah, but I wasn't any better.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't any better.
It's
I
a
just
big
didn't.
facade.
It was like punishment, right? It was just punishment, and I wanted to avoid punishment. So I was like, okay, these behaviors will land me in the loony bin. I don't want to do these things anymore.
Exactly. Don't say these certain
Or
things.
hide those things better. So that's what I ended up discharged with. Eventually, I did see a civilian therapist, and I'm real about it. The psychologist who was seeing me at the time too, because he told me if I wanted to cut myself to call him, and he just wanted to talk to me. And so the next time after I got out of there, I thought about doing it. I didn't do it, but I called him. I got sent back to another psychiatric ward.
Oh, good. That's their answer.
Yeah.
Right off the
Well,
bat.
and cutting, they've learned a lot about it at the time. It was very mysterious. anybody who cut themselves, they're automatically put into a suicidal category. And it never was that. It was dangerous, obviously, but I never wanted to kill myself. I wanted the pain to stop, and I had this weird coping mechanism that somehow helped me deal with it. It wasn't a good one. There's much better ones, but I'd never learned them. I needed to learn new ways to deal with stress. And it was a lot of stress that I needed to learn how to deal with. So since cutting was no good, I started fighting, organized fighting.
Organized, like Fight Club?
Yeah, well, boxing started.
Okay.
I did some boxing, and then combatives. I started going to all the combatives programs.
Like the Army combatives
Yeah.
or to the side?
No, Army combatives.
All right.
And that actually helped me a lot. It helped me sort of channel that aggression. And, there's something about getting punched in the face. That'll kind of scratch the same itch about yourself.
Yeah.
It sort of helps.
It's also humbling. A lot of people
It
need
is.
it. They really do.
It is. It calms you right down. Like, I used to go into the ring really amped up, kind of nervous, and then that first punch in the face, it's like, loose up. And
Get
all
out
of a
of
sudden
the way.
I felt calm and collected. I'm like, game on, bro.
That's the truth.
Let's go off. It's fun.
Which is very, for a woman too, that's very abnormal, but
Yeah, there was only
works.
2 women in my class.
Really?
It was me and this other girl. Poor thing. She was like a foot shorter than me, just miniature. And I don't know if you did this because you fought too, right?
yeah.
We had to circle up, and then we had to win 2 consecutive fights to go home at the end of the day.
Go round robin.
Yeah, you run robin, and you have to pick your opponent, right? So
Yeah.
the instructors would pick one person, and they'd usually pick one of us.
And you're just getting tired, it becomes harder to win.
It's so much harder, but I'd always pick her for my first fight, because poor thing, I was so much bigger than her. I just had to lay on top of her and
Yeah,
she'd
just
tap out.
Get an easy win from the
Get
get-go.
an easy win from the get-go, and then I'd pick one of the guys that was close to my size. I never won 2 fights in a row, but we did have I guess we'd call it a draw. Like we were just laying on the mat slapping each other because we're both too tired.
Yeah,
So
that's fair.
They let me go after
you off the
that.
mat.
Yeah, it's alright.
So that started helping you out. The drugs, did you continue to take the drugs after
No,
you left?
no.
Did you tell the Army that you took them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I kept
That's a big
filling-
trick, right?
It is a good trick. I kept
Yeah.
filling my prescriptions, and actually there was a handful I did take for a while. I took Klonopin for a while. If I wanted to cut myself, I'd take a Klonopin because it would just knock me out.
Yeah.
I got prescribed a lot of sleeping medication. I got Ambien. Turns out I didn't sleep when I was on Ambien. So somewhere in the midst of all this mental health treatment, I PCS'd. I ended up going to the hospital at Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Okay.
I'm still struggling with this, but I'm taking the Ambien and the Klonopin while I was at Fort Sill, and they also prescribed me Abilify, which I didn't take very long. Abilify is an antipsychotic. It was making me hallucinate. For the longest time, I thought there was a demonic raccoon living in my microwave in the barracks.
Jeez.
Like I was scared of my microwave. Like there's a demonic raccoon in there. Don't go anywhere near the microwave.
And you could visualize this
Yeah,
raccoon?
I saw it.
Oh
like,
my
the
God.
scare's gonna lunge out at me. It was terrifying. But
Had you ever done
hallucinating.
something like LSD or shrooms before that?
I did shrooms when I was a kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you hallucinated
Yeah, but
before?
the shrooms were like a peaceful, nice hallucination.
Yeah, it's kind of like colors and vibrations rather than just like a pure hallucination like LSD sometimes.
Yeah. When actually it wasn't even shrooms, it was peyote. Because I was on the Indian reservation.
Oh God.
Yeah, I did
I've never done
peyote.
that.
I think I did shrooms once too, but the peyote, I talked to a bear that was made out of stars in the universe, and
That's
we had
awesome.
a really in-depth conversation. It was pretty legit.
It's very strong, right?
It is cool.
I've heard that.
I don't think I'd do it again though.
It's a cactus?
I don't even know what peyote is.
Yeah, something like that.
We drank it in like a tea form, like
Okay.
it was a beverage, and it makes you barf your guts out.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, you get
And
sick.
then you
It's like
start.
you run a really high grade fever, and then you just start tripping.
Oh, I don't think I could do that.
Yeah, it's rough.
So now you're at a hospital. You quit taking the stupid drugs the Army gives you, as a
Yeah.
Band-Aid. Did they stigmatize you at all after you had that therapy with your career?
Not necessarily because I PCS'd.
Okay.
And so when I PCS'd, nobody really knew about my mental health history. And so I still had these prescriptions that I quit taking because Abilify was making me see my raccoons in my microwave. So I was like, well, we're not gonna do this anymore.
Yeah.
But I'd take Klonopin on occasion if I felt like cutting myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I would take Ambien. But I quit Ambien after a couple super weird incidences. One I would sleepwalk, and one time I went our barracks at Fort Sill for all the people that worked at the hospital was actually an old morgue.
Yep.
Yeah. And so the basement is where they used to keep the bodies, but when it became barracks, they turned it into a gym.
Okay.
And I woke up in the gym in my underwear multiple times. Like I was just taking Ambien, but then I would get up and walk to the basement in my underwear.
And you don't remember this walk?
No,
You just end up there.
I just wake up down there.
Well, thank God it wasn't the morgue then. I mean,
Yeah, I never
imagine that.
Well, yeah. But then another thing I was doing on Ambien that one of my friends told me about, like I started getting people calling me really concerned. And like, what is up with the blog you posted? I was like, what? I started a blog while I was on Ambien, and I was writing about scary combat stuff, like burning bodies and like dark stuff.
Stuff you've seen and okay.
So things that happened.
Yeah.
I was writing about it in a really cryptic, albeit poetic ways. It was dark, and I didn't remember doing that.
And only while you were on Ambien?
Only while I was on Ambien. I didn't even know the blog existed.
Yeah, right. It's kind of like a multiple personality thing. It just comes out when you know.
Yeah. So when I found out I was doing that, I quit Ambien. I quit Klonopin after a while, and I met the man who would become my husband later too. And I met Andrew at Fort Sill.
What was he doing?
He was a medic as well. We worked in the emergency room together. Shortly after that trip, so when I left Third ID, it was right before they had another deployment. So they were gone or leaving about the same time I PCS to Fort Sill. And after I'd been there for a couple of months, I found out, I got a call from one of my buddies back in Third ID, and he told me that one of my dear friends, John, had been killed in Iraq. He got hit by an IV. And John and I were close. When I was in the psych ward, he was one of like 3 people who would come to see me regularly. And
so was he still over there because you came back earlier, or did he go back out again?
John was still over there when I came home on Advon. He was attached to a different unit while we were over there, but we went to AIT together. We were in Third ID together. We were good friends.
So this happened on his first deployment, I'm guessing.
No, second.
His second.
So we were on the same Iraq deployment, and I got back. I PCS to Fort Sill, and then Third ID got ramped up to go back to Iraq. So now I'm at Fort Sill. John and a couple of my other friends are still in Third ID. And then they go back to Iraq, and I get a phone call that John got killed while I was at the ER at Fort Sill. I was mad. I was so mad. I wanted blood. And for medics, it's sort of convenient. When you're not already in a combat deploying unit, you can volunteer for deployment. It's really it was a common practice for medics to have a hub type unit and then get attached to other units.
Yeah.
So I jumped online and I volunteered for the next deployment. Whatever it was, didn't care. But there was an option. They were looking for female medics with combat experience. I'm like, well, that's it. So I clicked yes. And I was at a Christmas ball for my unit, and my sergeant major comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, Songer, you still want to deploy?" I was like, "Yes, Sergeant Major." He's like, "Good, pack your bags. You're leaving in 2 weeks." But I didn't have any details. I got orders, but the orders were absolute gibberish. The only thing I made out on them was Afghanistan. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to Afghanistan. So I went through CRC at Fort Benning, and then back on a plane, heading to Afghanistan, and I land in Bagram. And there's nobody at the tax terminal to meet me, and I'm like, I show my orders to the clerk, and I'm like, oh, I know who these guys are. I'll call them, just go grab some chow, and they'll probably be here to pick you up.
See what's happening.
You know what's happening. So I get back from the DFAC, and I fall asleep on my duffel bag, and I wake up to some bearded dude in civilian clothes kicking my boot, like, are you Rachel? I'm like, yeah. He's like, grab your shit, let's go. I'm like, okay. So I grab my stuff, we load it up into a pickup truck, and he takes me to Camp Vance.
Alright.
So I was getting attached to 3rd. So I spent the first couple of months just training, getting cross-trained in vet medicine, dental medicine, and then I got attached to an ODB and ran missions with them during my whole training. And they just wanted to see how I functioned. Well, I functioned the exact same way I did when I was with 3rd ID attached to the infantry and field artillery and QRF team, so I guess they thought that was good enough. So then I got sent to RC South and attached to ODA down there.
That's good that they were kind of sniffing you out before they did that, because I've seen it where they haven't done that, and we just kind of throw a warm body at a problem, and that could be troublesome for that person getting sent there, because you're like, whoa, I would have signed up for this, right?
Yeah.
And also troublesome for that unit that isn't expecting all the pain that comes with that learning experience. So I'm glad they at least kind of trained you up before they sent you out there.
Well, and it's funny, our hiring manager at Sage was the guy who procured me to the team.
Okay, all right.
And his buddy was on the OPB that I was rolling with. So they had a conversation about me ahead of time. So I got to RC South, we were on a COP kind of up in the mountains. And when I got there, the team sergeant met me. And one of the first things he asked me is like, "You cool with going outside the wire?" I'm like, "Yup." He's like, "Can you shoot?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "What can you shoot?" He's like, "Well, 50 cal gunner in Iraq and on this." And he's like, "Hey, can you shoot a 240?" I'm like, "Yeah." So he's like, "I want to see what you can do." So he pulls around a four-wheeler with a 240 mounted on the front of it, and takes me up on this little mountainside and points out this rock outcropping. He's like, "Can you shoot that?" So jumps on there, shot it. He's like, "All right, good enough. This is your fighting position on the wall, and you're going to be a 240 gunner on missions." Cool, sounds fun.
Dang.
So I stayed with that ODA for several months, and it was the best time of my life. It was a really good team to be attached to. Most of the guys were still really, really standoffish with me, but 3 or 4 guys that were willing to talk to me made all the difference in the world. The team sergeant was perfectly cool with using me for whatever mission they had.
That's awesome. So did they have medics on that team?
They did. They had just lost one medic before I got there, so they were short, and they got plussed up from a National Guard unit, I think.
Okay.
So they had some medics that weren't organic to the team, and then me.
Did you have a partner force there working with you?
The Afghans?
Yeah. A&A?
Yeah, we had A&A.
Okay.
It was a weird camp that we were on. We had our compound, and it was in the side of the mountain, and then the A&A compound was actually above us.
Okay.
It was pretty
Could be good or bad.
It was both.
Yeah.
On more than one occasion. But it had a really good overview of the whole valley that we were in. But I ran missions with them. It was a lot of hearts and minds missions, and me treating women and kids. And I started working really closely with Fox to try to get intel from my patients. And so a lot of people who were intel sources would come to see me, but actually just go talk to him. So me and the Fox were kind of in each other's hip pockets for that trip. But Team Sergeant, man, he used me for some squirrely stuff.
Oh, yeah? All right, so yeah, before we get to that, because you've told me a couple stories before, kind of crazy. I'm like, oh God, I can't imagine. But before that, so you, I'm just blanking out right now. What the heck were we talking about?
Well, I just got into the ODA.
Yeah, you got to the ODA. He was using you to gather intelligence. Were the Afghans more apt to give you intelligence because you were a medic or because you were a female or both?
Female.
Yeah.
So you're looking at 50% of the population that won't talk to a man. Funny to
Right off the
say,
bat.
yeah, they're off limits. And the women are the movers and the shakers in that country, but they're invisible.
Really?
Right? Like they don't have a public voice. I got so many women to rat out their shady husbands by offering them birth control.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why
And
did they birth control?
the first time I did it, it was almost a joke, and I was scared, like, right, because of cultural sensitivities. I don't know how these Muslim women are going to feel about birth control, but I had a lot of it. And I had a couple of women, I had one woman come in, she had just given birth to her 14th child, and she had a uterine prolapse. That is a uterus falling out of your vagina. She came in with her burqa on, and blood everywhere. I got all the men out of the room, and I had a female interpreter at the time, which was great. And I got her burqa up, and her uterus was between her knees, and it had gravel stuck to it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, no! Like, what do I do? The only thing I could do was evac her, because at the time we were still treating local nationals at higher echelons. So that was great. I'm like, I don't know. So I'm just gonna rinse the gravel off of that, wrap it up in a chuck, set it up a little higher, and put you on a helicopter and send you to a doctor.
Yes.
But she came back, and she was doing really good. When she came back in, I made a joke to my interpreter about giving her birth control. I had kind of stayed away from the subject up until this point just because I didn't know how it was going to be taken. But my interpreter interpreted it. And then the woman looked at me and she's like really urgent looking. I was like, oh, you want some?
That's what she wants, yeah.
Yep. So I started giving depot shots to the women that would come in that wanted it.
Wow.
And man, those women they're little birds when it
So
came
that's what
in.
they wanted, and then the men all wanted Viagra, conversely.
Basically.
Jeez, it drives the human race, I guess. It's interesting, yeah, because as an intel nerd, I always derived a lot of good intelligence from the medics, and I would even pretend to be a doctor at times, right? Because I can talk medically and do the basic work of doing an assessment, prescribing basic stuff and everything. We had to at times, even I'm a Charlie, but people are more apt to just tell you stuff, and that could just be general atmospherics of their town and how ISIS came in or what the heck ever, right? How many trucks are there, where the ISIS checkpoints are, whatever, right? They're more apt to tell you that if you're helping them. And also people come there sometimes just to provide intelligence, but it gives their information, it gives them an outlet to leave their town and to go, seek attention, but actually they're helping us. And then with a woman too, I've definitely got a lot from women because women are naturally disarming, and men often just want to talk to a woman because you guys have caring natures, and they're able to just give information. Sometimes they would never tell me something, but you get a woman walk in there, and one, they're afraid of women a lot of times, and two, one-on-one they are, and two, they're just more apt to talk to women, I feel.
No, I agree, and I think medicine does have a huge amount to do with just disarming people because you're caring for them. It gives you physical touch. Just touching somebody, giving a physical examination makes them feel at ease as long as you're not, doing anything painful or doing invasive type exam. But people enjoy it and they do calm down when you're actually caring for them. And typically with a patient, you're going to put themselves below their level, which also kind of puts them at ease too. So there's a lot about being a woman and being a medic that opened up intel doors nobody's business.
Was he kind of directing you forward? Okay, if they mention anything about this specific location, this town, these people, whatever. Okay.
Yeah. So I'd have my SOAP note, which is all the medical stuff, and then I would take intel notes below it, and I would give it to him, and then he'd tell me certain information he was looking for, and I started just putting with my medical questions, what province are you from? Just
naturally slide it in.
Yeah, just slide it in there, demographic information, or we would tell them, hey, what province are you from? If enough people from your province come here, we're going to take rice, flour, oil, we're going to do a log pack mission that direction, or maybe just bring medicine to you because there's so many people that need care. So that would increase the influx of patients and intel that we were seeing.
Yeah, and we're not strictly just sapping them for information we don't care about them. We're getting little inputs of information and atmospherics and feeling. That way we can tie it into an overall understanding and picture of this area to be able to secure that populace or whatever, or at least secure our area.
See on a map what areas we were reaching too. Who knew about us?
Our influence,
Yeah, so it was really helpful, and we got to do a lot of really good medicine there too.
Nice.
I learned so much while I was there, and it was nice. The doctors I worked with in the ER back at Fort Sill, they were night shift doctors, so I could call them anytime I wanted, because sometimes the CGSOTIC surgeon wasn't always accessible, so I could just jump on the sat phone and call one of my ER docs with a question, or what labs should I run, and so I had some really helpful civilian doctors helping me out too when I was there.
That's awesome. So you're running MISH with them. What was the pace compared to Iraq, your first deployment?
It's kind of hard to compare. We took more direct contact in Afghanistan, but fewer IEDs and random explosions and goats blowing up in Afghanistan. Our area didn't have a lot of landmines. Other areas I know did, but We took quite a bit of direct contact. They like to shoot like pop shots at the cop in the middle of the night. Mostly it wasn't well aimed. It was just to disrupt our patterns and keep us from sleeping. They were just being annoying. We took contacts a couple times on missions. And if we ran a mission 5 days a week, we'd maybe take contact on one of them.
Okay.
But we didn't get into too many like heavy engagements. Not with that team.
Yeah. So tell me a crazy story about, well, if you want.
Oh, that story that I told you before.
Or one of, any of them.
Yeah, that's a good, well, it's sort of a succession of stories. But we're getting ready to go on a mission. Well, we're doing the pre-mission brief, which we usually did the night before it rolls out.
Okay.
The team sergeant kicked me out of this particular pre-mission brief, and
Right.
I thought that was weird, but I was 20 years old at the time and a female E5 medic. So my whole attitude for this whole deployment was like, I'm just happy to be here. Like, what are the odds that I get to do this kind of stuff with these guys? Like, this is awesome.
240 gun. Like.
Yeah, I was like, I was having the time of my life. I didn't want to jeopardize it. So kicks me out of pre-mission brief. I'm like, okay. So I just leave. And the next morning, I'm just getting on my normal truck, strapping my egg bag down, making sure my gun's ready to go. And the team sergeant comes up to me and he's like, oh, you're not going to be on this truck today, Rich. You're going to go with them. And he points at one of the Afghan pickup trucks, like one of the Toyota pickup trucks they used to drive. And he's like, you can take your interpreter with you. The interpreter's name was Hecky, and he was awesome. So Hecky and I were just, I'm like, this is weird, but we go squish in the back of one of these Toyota pickup trucks. Okay, that's odd. But normally we did the staggered formation and convoys going out where it'd be American, ANA, American, ANA. And we roll out like that. I'm like, wonder what this is all about. But like 20 minutes down the road, all of a sudden all the Americans go that direction, and all the ANA trucks go that direction. And I'm like, oh no.
You're not privy to this plan.
No, I have no idea what the plan is.
You're like, they're about to Jessica Lynch me.
Yes, I was scared. I was like, what is going on right now? Because I'm the only American in the convoy now. Only one. We got Hecky. He's not American. He's Afghan. But at least he speaks English.
Do you trust him at all, or?
Yeah, I trusted Hecky.
Okay.
You know, it's funny, they always said not to ever fully trust any of your interpreters, but I did trust Hecky. He's a really good guy. Anyway, we drive way, way, way up into the mountains, and the guys in the front of the truck, they're not talking. I'm elbowing Hecky, like, what is going on? He's like, I don't know. So we drive up into the mountains, and we park in front of this compound. You know, most of the houses and stuff are behind like some mud wall square and stuff. So we parked in front of that, and the Afghan National Army guys kind of gestured for me to get out of the truck. Everybody gets out of the trucks, and they're marching me into the compound. I'm like, oh no. But I still have my weapon. Right?
Can you see people in the compound?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. There's a gate, big metal gate. So that opens up though. The ANA guys stay outside. The ANA commander kind of like walks me in, hands me off to a family, and then walks out. And this family has a blanket out, and they're serving tea, and
they're ready for you.
They're ready for me. They're serving me some lamb and some rice and stuff. They got
It was
this
a
whole
sacrifice.
spread. They're really excited that I'm there. And so I'm still freaking out. Every opportunity, I'm like, Hecky, what's going on? What are they saying? He's still just lost. He doesn't know either. So we eat. And I still don't know what's going on. At some point, I go use their bathroom, which was a terrifying experience by itself. Because it was like this second-story mud hut room where you had to climb this rickety old ladder to get up to it.
They had a second-story bathroom.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but story might be a strong word for what this was. But I get up there, and the floor is like mud on boards with a hole in the middle that's sort of caving into this giant pile of shit down below. And I'm looking down this hole. I'm like, I might have to Slumdog Millionaire this shit. This is going to be my escape. I'm just going to jump into it, and I'm going to run to the river and jump in that. And then I'm probably going to get captured by the Taliban and decapitated. So I'm like, okay, last resort. But that's a potential plan right
it's
there.
It's a plan, yeah.
It's a plan. This is a possibility right
here.
here.
It's scary that that's an option.
Yeah,
right there.
it's terrifying.
But the poop was falling outside of the house here?
Yeah.
Oh, dude, right next to where they live?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Pretty gross. But anyway, so I have this little backup plan that it's not favorable, but you know, whatever, got it. I go out, they start bringing all the villagers into the compound, and they all want to see me, and they all want their blood pressure taken, and I'm giving out all my Flintstone vitamins that I had in my 8 bag.
So they know you're a doctor.
They know I'm a medic, so they start bringing all the villagers in, and I just start giving general exams, and I do this for hours. And then the sun starts setting, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to live here now. And now I'm looking around the family like, which age-appropriate man am I going to be forced to marry? Like, and they speak Pashtun. I can't speak a lick of Pashtun. I couldn't make the sounds the right way. Like, why couldn't they speak Dari? I can speak a little bit of Dari at least. I was so mad. Like, in a Pashtun-speaking family, I gotta marry one of these guys. And my whole attitude is basically, I live here now. This is my new life.
You're stuck. Your dad won't be able to find you.
So they made me a bed, and I just set my rifle up against the door. I'm like, I live here now. So,
were you in uniform?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And so at this point, my top's off. It was like brown t-shirt and pants kind of thing. Put my jacket on the top of my rifle. Like, we'll see how long that has to sit there. And just as I'm about to go to bed, some American dude just barrels into the room, and he looks at me. He's like, "Rachel, what the fuck are you doing?" And I was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I was so mad. I was so mad. He's like, "Get your shit. Let's go to the truck." And so we go out of the compound and just walk out, and all the American trucks are lined out up there. But at this point, I'm getting sick. Normally, before I ate Afghan food, I would take a prophylactic. I would take some Cipro so that it didn't make me sick. But I didn't have the opportunity because I didn't know I was going to be doing this today. So by the time I get out to that truck, I'm feeling like I'm in puke. I'm not feeling well at all. And I'm just sort of like curled up in a fetal position. Everything's starting to hurt. And I got hit with the worst sickness I've ever had in my life. So I spent like the next week just diarrhea and vomiting. I remember projectile vomiting up a Fruit Loop. I tried to eat a Fruit Loop and I was just...
For a week, your body was just out.
That sick. I was that sick. When I finally started getting better, I had this sense about the team that I shouldn't ask any questions. So I didn't. But shortly after this happened, I was back down in my clinic and some shots went off somewhere on the top. And the guys start radioing down to me and they're like, "Get your ass up to the top right now." So I grab my shit, I run up to the top. Well, somebody had just tried to shoot the Alpha. And so now the whole ODA and me are holed up in the top, guns aiming out, and all the A&A are coming around, guns aiming in towards the top. And we're talking like 250 of them.
One of the partner force guys?
Yeah, tried to shoot at the Alpha.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he knew what he's doing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we stay holed up in the top on this weird standoff for what felt like an eternity. It probably wasn't that long. But at some point, the partner first, the A&A commander, drags some dude to like the front of the talk and just shoots him in front of us. And I'm like,
quick justice.
Does that mean we're cool? Like, so we had this weird, uneasy tension, but after that, Fox was very busy talking to everybody, and we walked around very, very ready for a while. Didn't really find out what that was about either. And then a little bit later, maybe a couple days after that, Team Sergeant comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, Rach, I want you to pack an overnight bag, and you're gonna deliver something for me." He's like, "Here's the envelope, just make sure you keep it with you at all times and just be ready for a night or two. Bird's gonna come pick you up tonight." Again, I was like, I feel like I shouldn't ask any more questions. I'm just happy to be here. I'll just do what he says. Mm-hmm. So Bird lands, I jump on the Bird, we land in TK, and I'm still unaccustomed to how CJ Sodif runs things, but this was awesome. Normally I have to march places once a bird lands from something, I have to walk somewhere, but this bird lands as a Chinook, and out of the back hatch, this dude just drives up in a four-wheeler, wearing civilian clothes again. He's like, "You Rachel?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Jump on, let me grab your bags." Puts the bags on the four-wheeler and we go off. He's like, "Hey, you hungry?" I'm like, "Yeah." So we go to the DFAC, get some chicken wings. He's like, "You like The Matrix? You want to go watch The Matrix?" I'm like, "Sure." So we go to his room, we watch The Matrix, and after a little while, we eat some chicken wings. He's like, "Oh, it's time for your next flight." So load back up onto the four-wheeler, he drops me back off at the Bird.
Still don't know where you're going.
No, this was a funny story, very embarrassing on my part though.
Yeah.
I think the guy was CIA. I don't know though. Maybe. Who knows? But when I got on that bird, I looked down at my rifle and I realized it was his and not mine. I'm like,
oh
no!
gosh.
So I tell the crew chief, I'm like, I got the wrong rifle. And so they had to like stop the takeoff, which, you know, is pretty disruptive for military purposes.
Yeah, the whole country
so
was shut down over a lost gun.
Yeah, it was.
Seen it happen.
Yeah, it was bad, but we didn't take off until we got our rifles swapped. I don't know who they called, but I didn't get off the bird. He just came back. We swapped rifles. Like, I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry, I grabbed yours instead of mine. I just wanted your cool sights. Like, very embarrassing. But
the Matrix really threw you off your game.
it did. I was very rattled this whole time. But got on another bird, and this time we flew for a really long time. I'm on a fixed wing now. And we eventually land. I get off the bird. I see mountains that don't look like Afghanistan mountains to me, but I don't know where I am. I've been flying for a while. Figured out I was in Kyrgyzstan. Okay, this time nobody beats me at the bird.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, well, I'm heading back to the tax terminal and try to figure out what's going on. And what am I going to say to the clerk, right? I got nothing to say to the clerk. So I just decided to sit down and watch Sports Center for a while. So I'm just sitting there, with my little backpack, watching Sports Center, and a dude in a suit walks up to me. He's like, are you Rachel? Social security number, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yep. He's like, you can give it to me. I'm like, take it out of my jacket and just hand him the package.
Yeah, but you don't even know what's in there, right?
I don't know what's in it. So then, yeah. He's like, okay, you can get back on the plane, go home now. Okay. So I go home.
Thanks.
Cool. So, flash that CG Soda badge to random pilots. Like, where are you going? Can I get on your plane? And that thing was magic.
It worked, huh?
Yeah.
All
Like,
right.
I could just go up to random people, like, where are you flying to? Look at my badge. I'm gonna go with you, okay? That's too much power for a young U5. I was intoxicated. But eventually I made it back. And I did find out what was happening, but not for years. But after a couple weeks, that ODA, third group ripped out and seventh group ripped in. And third took me back to CAF for a while so that seventh group could do whatever they wanted with me. So I worked at the prison in CAF for a little bit, doing physicals and sick call for the sick prisoners.
KNR?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And then seventh group came in, and then I got sent right back to the same cop for a while. But when seventh group came, I got sent to different ODAs for specific mission sets. So I never stayed with another ODA for more than a month. So it's like I was here for a couple of weeks, and then here for a month, and then here for a couple more weeks. And I think I got tossed around to like 5 or 6 different ODAs.
Oh wow.
Yeah, for something really specific. And I had some other weird, wild times with some of the other groups. I was in another location where that Taliban had a hit out on me.
Oh really? You were a theater asset at that point.
I was. It was awesome.
Shoveling money to CIA agents and.
Well, I had a code name too that I didn't know about, but apparently it was being spread around. So if I'm nervous or I'm in shock, I get the giggles. I know I broke my arm once, and nobody believed that my arm was broken because I was laughing too hard. So every time I get into a firefight, I'm also laughing my ass off. I'm in shock, right? I'm not having a good time, but that's my shock or panic response.
Maybe
laughing.
that was old boy. That was a suicide guy from earlier. He just had that response.
Gosh, maybe that was him. But apparently, people came to know me as Dr. Giggles.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, I like it too, but it's weird. It's my second deployment to Afghanistan. Somebody had heard of Dr. Giggles. I was like, dang, that's cool. I don't know if that'd be one
Were they
impression.
talking like third person about Dr. Giggles and they didn't know it was you?
Yep.
All the better.
All the better. But I got to this one ODA and they called me, oh, like, so you're Dr. Giggles. I'm like, what now? I'm like, what am I? Okay.
I love it.
It's pretty cool. But I got to this one ODA and they wanted me to do the same thing I was doing in the previous COP, and that's gather intel from the female population. So they put me in the clinic, they put out a whole bunch of flyers letting them know a female medic was going to be there, and no women showed up at all. And they were mad, right? They're like, well, they're not going to come here, we're going to take you to them. So then we started going out on mission, village to village, and I just sort of parked myself. They'd go to the elders and stuff, like, we have a female medic, can she treat your wife, can she treat your daughters? And they're just really hesitant to let me fit. Like, she can treat my goats is basically what the response was. So while I was running those missions, at some point, Taliban got my picture. Like, you could tell they were like up on a mountaintop and they had zoomed in and got a picture of my face. And one night I was in my bunk sleeping, and I feel like half the team just turned on my lights, poured into my room, started packing my bags for me and putting my uniform on my body. Like, you need to leave right now. I was like, what? Why? And like, they told me that there were 2 Taliban members that were dressed up as females that were coming to the clinic, and they're suicide bombers, and their goal in life was to kill me. I was like, oh, that's amazing. And one of the guys showed me a flyer. They showed me a flyer. It had my face on it, a bunch of Arabic. I was like, what's it say? It says, infidel women must die. I was like, oh, can I keep it? Like, no.
Yeah, you didn't get to keep it.
I didn't get to keep it.
Oh my gosh. That would be worthy of
I
like
know.
a photo in your house when you walk in, you know?
After this happened, my laptop got scrubbed, my camera got scrubbed. They took everything away from me because we ended up flying to another compound that I'm pretty sure was full of CIA guys again, and they took all my stuff. They wouldn't let us in the building. We just sat because there was a couple other medical assets they had. There was a PA and a medical equipment repair specialist that had gone to this COP with me, and we just had to sit in the gravel while they took all of our stuff and scrubbed it. And then we flew back to CAF.
That's interesting. Did that have any kind of like, did you have any fear or anxiety because you knew that they're actively looking for you at that point?
No, I was kind of proud of it.
Were you proud?
I was proud.
Yeah.
I mean, I was weird when I got home because of that. Like, I kind of stayed off of social media, and I was really cautious about my name being out there.
Yeah.
Luckily, my name has changed a couple times since then, so
it helps.
it should be harder to find. But yeah, it's pretty distant, and like anything that was secret is all redacted or just like released now. So
Yeah. That's what you talk about.
Yeah.
How's your cigar?
It was delicious.
Yeah. What did you end up smoking?
Is it terrible that I already forgot what it was?
No.
It's a McAuliffe.
Yeah,
I
McAuliffe.
love
That's right.
McAuliffe. And which one was it? Really? Here it is.
What chose you to get that? Because we were in the cigar humidor and you got all excited when you heard about McAuliffe.
I had one of these forever ago. This is the Migdalia. It's really good. I had a McAuliffe years ago and I just loved it. I don't remember which one it was. You ever have like that perfect cigar? I had one of these and it was paired with a meal of quail and roasted potatoes. And it was so delightful. And I'm trying to replicate that experience.
Yeah, that's like an indelible memory that's always going to be there, and it's going to be hard to replicate.
What's that cigar?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I have a few like that. Of course, an Opus X cigar. A Tour Fuente is typically my favorite cigar.
Yeah.
But the Opus X, I mean, who can't afford that? It's $50 a cigar.
Right.
Normally, this one, the fellow mentioned there, it's a Under Crown shade. So he was saying that it's the Connecticut wrapper, and then they put it. Typically, they let the leaves dry out by the sun, but he puts like a shade. This company puts a shade over it, so they get, I guess, only a certain amount of the UV light or the drying with that sun dry process. I don't know, but it does have like a more distinct Connecticut flavor. It's not as like heady as a sun grown or anything, and flavorful. It still has that like smoothness of a Connecticut. But I definitely noticed like towards the middle and the end of the cigar, it's gotten like really heady, like the flavors. Yeah. More so than a typical Connecticut. So I do like the cigar. It's the first time I've ever had it.
Mine's really spicy towards the end. It was pretty mellow at the front.
Uh-huh.
I wish I have an embarrassing confession about cigar smoking. I've been smoking for about 20 years now.
Uh-huh.
And when I first started with the Swisher Sweets, my first sergeant back at the FSB was very, very proud of me and excited that I was smoking cigars because he was a big cigar smoker, and he started introducing me to Aficionado magazine.
Yeah.
He introduced me, like, there's this, like, what is it? Alec Bradley was doing, like, some event, and he gave me all the info for it. He's like, you gotta go, you'll learn a whole bunch about cigars. I have not been able to retain the cigar vocabulary. So I have no idea what I'm smoking. No, like, after 20 years of smoking, I just keep smoking stuff, and I don't know what I like.
Really?
Or even what it is. Like, I know what a Lancero and a Maduro is, and a Corona, and that's about all I got.
I do like a cigar like that that is complex, and like this too, actually, that doesn't stay one flavor. How you're getting different like flavor hits towards the middle and the end. Is it peppery at all?
Yeah, it's very peppery.
Yeah.
Peppery and spicy, and kind of sweet still, even though we're at the end.
Leathery?
No,
No.
not much leather. It's
Your
actually
husband,
clean.
the one he tried today, which is the CAO, the 8-painter, I think it's called, has like a
Panhead.
panhead. Yeah.
Yeah.
That one has a really distinct flavor like that. Like it's kind of peppery, but also like very smooth, and then like a leather finish to it, or almost like cedar wood.
Oh, nice.
Phenomenal cigar, yeah. But no, that's cool. So you moved in, you had some crazy experiences there. Were you kind of trending up as a soldier at that time, and you're like, hey, this is where I want to be, this is Rachel,
Yeah.
my career, my purpose in life?
Well, especially after getting so much training from the 18 Deltas,
Yeah.
I fell in love all over again with medicine.
Okay.
And I was definitely at the peak of my performance medically at this point, because working in the emergency room was really helpful. I had great doctors that provided me great training there, and then more training with the Deltas.
You're well-rounded now at this point, right?
As a medic, yeah. I think
Yeah.
tactically, I had a pretty good tactical background and medical background. And I redeployed back to Fort Sill from there, back to the emergency room. Let me back up. Before I redeployed, I got orders for recruiting duty.
To where?
You don't know when you
Okay.
get orders for recruiting, it's just for the school. I was mad. That was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do war and I wanted to do medicine. And recruiting did not sound like my flavor. So I tried to extend in Afghanistan with group, but it turns out you cannot escape recruiting. If that sucker gets
Pretty
its
hard
claws
slog.
in you, you are going.
Yeah.
Like, you have to pretty much die to not go to recruiting school. I had actually made such a fit about it, I had to go talk to my sergeant major. He's like, your only option is to go to the school or sign a deck statement, which is declination of continued service. Like, I had to either get out or go to school. I was like, well, I guess I'm going to school. So I ended up being a recruiter in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Okay,
So
okay.
not too far from here.
Federal resettlement location.
Really?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I was going up there, not to cut you off, but I had to take like 20 grand out of the bank at one time, and they like wouldn't. There was a PNC bank there. That's what it was. So I had to go up there and drive, and I remember seeing all these like matams everywhere. I'm like, what the hell? Like Arab restaurants, you know, like Argila,
Okay,
Abuka.
that makes a lot more make sense. I actually encountered a guy who got arrested for terrorism while I was there.
Really?
Yeah, and he's a guy I interacted with.
Iraqi guy or a
Iraqi.
Yeah.
He had an Iraqi grocery store. And when I saw it when I was a recruiter, I was like, I love Iraqi food. So I popped in, I started talking to him. He wanted some help with English, so I stopped in a couple of times and helped him with like verbs and conjugation in English and stuff like that. So he had my number. He had my government cell phone number.
Oh, really?
And he started blowing up my phone randomly, like, hey man, I don't have time for this every day.
Yeah.
And there was a couple months later, I was actually in the government vehicle with my commander, and we were visiting one of the high schools I covered. And he got this like notification on his phone that somebody in Bowling Green had just been arrested for like building bombs. Like they had a storage unit full of all the bomb making material, and they were sending them back to the Middle East. And then he read the name off. I was like, oh snap! I was like, sir, sir, just so you know, that guy has my phone number, and he calls me a lot. And I explained the whole thing to him really quick, but I ended up having to talk to the FBI about him too. But beyond that, I was like, I've been trying to teach him English, and I buy groceries from him sometimes. It was crazy.
Which is another reason. I mean, they were looking for you in Afghanistan. Like names and pictures, social media profiles. Don't think for 1 second that we put that out and it's just gone or you're impossible to find, because they have coordinated campaigns to target certain individuals in America and outside of America. You know, and it's scary.
It is.
But yeah, I was at a Matam there. It was interesting. I was talking to the girl there in Arabic, and she was like, "Oh, why do you know Arabic?" Blah blah blah. And I would give her little pieces, you know. And then she's like, "Oh, well, that's funny. The guy, my brother back here, he worked with the army, you know, in 2005." I'm like, "No way." I'm like, "Cool." Like, and then she brought him out. We shook hands and stuff, and I was talking to him, and I knew some Iraqi Arabic, and it turns out he mentioned fifth group before me. That he worked with fifth group, and I'm like, "What?" You know. And he told me the team and everything. And then I told him I was in fifth group, of course, at that time. And then he told me that the whole area since Desert Storm and then Bosnia, Kosovo,
Yes,
Herzegovina.
I put a lot of people from Kosovo in the army when I was recruiting.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that whole area apparently is a federal rehabilitation or resettlement area.
That's actually, I've always wondered why it had such a dense Kosovarian, I don't know if that's how you say it, population.
Yeah, you said that.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
It was cool though because like being in that restaurant, you would just see all these Iraqis and Arabs come in and stuff, and they had like Bowling Green Fire Department or whatever, and they were just assimilated. I'm like, this is the American dream. Like,
yes, it is.
Whatever happened, they got here, step one, and now they're contributing to the dream of us, right? Working together, liberty, equality, order, justice, right?
Yeah.
I dig it.
And that's the thing I really appreciated about both of my deployments is because I had to integrate myself with a lot of the local nationals just in medicine. I didn't mention this, but when I was in Iraq, I also worked in prisons there too. I worked at the occupied detention facility downtown with all the local nationals, and then we had another detention facility on the FOB, but we treated a lot of local nationals. And so we were kind of talking about this at one point too, about how the Army, especially if you're a combatant, they tend to dehumanize the enemy population, and I think they do it too much to a point where you stop seeing them as people. And I never had that ability to do that. I treated them as patients too much for that programming to ever really take hold. And I'm grateful. I'm very grateful. I feel like I left parts of my heart in Afghanistan and Iraq because there's so many people there I cared about.
Yeah. You see so many touching stories on a daily basis. If you're not a psychopath and you care about people to some extent, you just it's impossible to escape. You always think, what happened to this guy I worked on, or this kid I saw, or whatever.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, especially the kids.
Yeah,
so many
kids
kids had an impact on me. Like, I love those kids. I treated a lot of really cool kids in Afghanistan with the ODA, but two patients in particular. One's really heartbreaking, and the other one restored my hope. But there was a father who brought his infant daughter in, and she'd been sick for way, way, way too long. She was probably a year old. She had this unpatent IV just like stuck in her arm. It wasn't doing anything except making her arm fat. And I listened to her lungs, and they were just wet. Like, you could just hear rattling when I listened to her breathe. And her eyes were rolled into the back of her head, and she's just dehydrated. She's malnourished. She was a wreck. And she was like on the verge of death already. And he handed her to me. And I looked at her, I was like, she needs to be evac'd. She needs to be evac'd. I was like, I can't put her on a helicopter like this. She'll die instantaneously. She has to be intubated. But intubation is so hard on your body. It was like, if they intubate her, she might die too. So it was like this, she's gonna die. She could die with the intubation. She's definitely gonna die if I don't intubate her and put her on birth. So I intubated her. And, well, I actually called one of the deltas because I'd never intubated an infant before. So he intubated, I assisted, and I didn't know this at the time, but he had already seen some pretty rough stuff, and he was basically done with treating kids. Like, he was mad when I called him. He's like, just send them away. I was like, I can't send them away. They're here. She needs help. So begrudgingly, he came down, he intubated her, her heart stopped. We did CPR on her for like 10 minutes, but she was so gone. And when I wrapped her up in a blanket and I handed her back to her dad, who stuffed her in a backpack, just smushed her into a backpack, put it on like it was nothing, and walked out. Like, I was like, F it, bomb the whole country, I don't even care right now.
Yeah,
Bomb
at
it
that
all.
point.
Just destroy it all. But I think God knew where I was mentally, and I needed a little bit of a pick-me-up. So a couple weeks later, another father brings his similarly aged daughter in, and she comes in. He's got her parked on his lap, and she's kind of fat and really happy, and she's immaculate, right? She's so clean. She's got little eye makeup on and little baby jewelry. And I take her and I do a quick exam on her, and I don't see anything wrong. And so I asked the interpreter, I was like, can you ask him why he brought her in? And she asked, and he's like, I just want to make sure she's healthy. That's it. I was like, give him all the flour, oil, toys, clothes, diapers, you name it, give it all to him. And I felt much better after him. I have a picture of her and her dad. Like, she's laughing up at the camera, and he's just looking at her all adoringly. I'm like,
Nice.
I needed that.
You needed that, yeah, at that time. So
Yeah.
you get back from that deployment, and then did you meet your soon-to-be husband before recruiting or after?
We met before recruiting, so we had actually met before my deployment briefly.
Okay.
While I was deployed with group, he went to selection. So when I got back, he had already gone through selection, been selected, and he was waiting for the Q course. And that's sort of when we started dating. And when he went to the Q course, I went to recruiting duty. So
Okay.
we dated long distance through the Q course and through recruiting duty. And then when he graduated, I was getting close to the end of my term, but he went straight to 5th group and then he got deployed.
Okay.
And we decided on the phone during his deployment that we were going to get married when he got back. So he got back from that trip. We got married right at the end of my recruiting tour, and then I got stationed at Fort Campbell on the 101st.
Okay, so perfect, right?
Perfect.
You guys are together now.
Yeah, sort of.
Well, what year is this?
This was in 2012.
12, okay.
So he gets back from the deployment, we get married. Like a month after we get married, he goes to dive school, just several months. And then he goes on like a J set, and then I get orders for a deployment. So then I go back to Afghanistan.
So, not to cut you off, but like when he's in, like 5th group and you're in our first, you're both in the Army, but like you're still, the Army doesn't care. Like if you have a deployment, he has a deployment, you're doing it.
Yeah.
They don't care about like
No, they don't care.
sustainability.
We're in the same location, which they think is good enough.
Is that that's a rule, right? That you do try to get a spouse at the same base
You
location?
try to.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the Married Army Couples Program.
Yeah,
basically. Yeah. They try to, but there's no guarantee. It all depends on jobs and positions and availability.
That's
if you
fair.
don't have jobs that can be co-located, you're not going to be co-located.
Yeah,
But luckily,
especially.
we were.
Yeah.
But I deployed to Afghanistan as a year-long deployment. And while I was there, I was on the phone with him. He's like, Rich, I got orders to deploy too. It was basically going to be a high five on the tarmac kind of scenario.
Really?
Yeah, like as
Coming
soon
to
as-
Afghanistan.
Yeah, he was coming to Afghanistan when I was going to be leaving Afghanistan.
How crazy though.
So I talked to my unit. There wasn't a lot going on that trip. I was basically working in an aid station, running a clinic, treating sprained ankles and herpes all year. It was terrible.
Yeah.
But nothing like somebody else couldn't do just as easily. We had plenty of people. So I talked to my chain of command, I explained it, and they're like, do you want to go home early? I was like, I'd love to, just so I can see him before he deploys. So they sent me home a couple of months early. And when I got home, he was sick. He was at the medical refresher course at Fort Bragg because he was in 18 Delta.
Okay.
And so I met him there, and we were staying in a hotel, and I remember I was laying on his chest and I could hear rattling. I was like, that's weird. And he's like, yeah, I've had this weird chest cold, I just can't shake it. And then he started coughing up blood. I was like, well, that's not normal. And he was just like taking Mucinex, and he's like, yeah, I'm just gonna run it out. If I run enough, it'll go away.
Mm-hmm.
So he's out running, hacking up blood. I'm like, what the heck? And we finally get back to Fort Campbell, and he starts having hip pain, and then he's having like chest pain that's shooting up into his face. And man, he kept going to the doctor over and over and over again. And this is not a weak man, He's not a crybaby. He first time go to dive school. He's impressive. Super fast runner. One of the fastest ones in his company, from what he said. I don't know how dependable that is, but I believe him. But yeah, his health just started taking this downward spiral, and no doctors were taking him seriously until he went to cardiology, and they did an echo, and he had what's called a pericardial effusion, which is the sac around your heart, just gets full of fluid. It's no good. It's a lot of pressure in your heart. It's a hard beat. And it's usually a problem that comes with a lot of other significant disease processes.
Okay.
So they took that seriously, and he ended up at the Vanderbilt cardiology floor for weeks. And they ran every test, and like stress tests, he was normal because he's an athlete. And they're like, oh, well, it might be histoplasmosis, or it might be, well, it's not tuberculosis, but it's probably histoplasmosis. It'll clear up in a while. It didn't. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And finally, they did an x-ray that showed some nodules that had increased. They'd done an x-ray before, it had like 3 nodules, now he had like 7.
Is he off to the side right now, or is he still working during all this process?
Oh, he's still working.
Still working, yeah.
His unit's getting ready to deploy. His team getting ready to go back to Afghanistan at this point, because this was the deployment he was supposed to go on that I came home for.
And he's in the major leagues. He's on an SF team in Pittsburgh, deployment
he's
inside.
ODA.
Like, that's the focus.
Yeah. So he's doing all the training and all that, but his health is just spiraling. And finally they decide that they're going to do a biopsy on one of the nodules in his lungs, and it was cancer. And we didn't know this. He was on crutches and running the medical gamut when his team deployed, and basically they were just high-fiving at the PAX terminal, like, all right, man, I'll see you when you catch up, get your medical stuff figured out, and just meet us down there was the plan. But then he got the cancer diagnosis, and it was stage 4 lung cancer, non-smoker, don't know why, and we didn't ask how long he was given at that time, but doctors told us later that they gave him about 6 months to live. So that was a giant punch in the face, like the biggest punch in the face I've ever had in my life, and him, obviously. And we called all of our family. I remember when we called them out, we got the news on Valentine's Day.
Oh, God.
And our power had gone out, and it was a huge cold snap. So we were in our bed, bundled up in all of our warmest clothing, FaceTiming all of our family members, telling them that he had cancer. And it was rough. So a bunch of his family came out for his PET scan and his first appointments and stuff like that.
Y'all are pretty close, it sounds like, too.
Yeah. I mean, I would consider him, he was my best friend.
And your families were
our
close.
families were close. And so they all came out. His PET scan lit up like a damn Christmas tree.
Really?
His whole body was just riddled with cancer. And so the news was pretty bad. He was supposed to start chemo, radiation, and he was supposed to have a full hip replacement, like all within a week.
You're like this young, strapping, healthy guy, rock solid abs, dive school,
He had an
SF
8-pack.
guy.
It was ridiculous.
I've
Like,
seen it,
who
yeah.
has an 8-pack?
He
Why
did.
would you have that? Like the maintenance that you need to keep that thing is ridiculous.
And then you're seeing deterioration, and you're like, how?
Actually, he wasn't like just medically deteriorated, but physically he still looked fine. He just
Really?
had this pain. He was still running. He was still running and lifting and functioning normally. So it was almost surreal being told that you gotta start chemo radiation and have a hip replacement. Like, he just went on a 12-mile run the other day. Like, what? So it was bizarre, but then within a couple of days they had done some genetic testing and he was eligible for gene therapy, which was amazing news. And then they found out after scans, his hip was a sclerotic lesion, so instead of taking bone away, it was building more bone. So he got to keep his hip.
All right.
So it's all really, really good news. So he was on gene therapy medication in different clinical trials for 3 years. And still working. He left the team. He stayed in Rudy, obviously, but stayed on the ODA. And eventually he couldn't jump anymore, and he kept diving for a while too, but then he'd get to a point where he'd be submerged for a little bit and he'd come back up and start coughing up more blood. And he loved diving, and so he wanted to hold on to that as long as he could, but when he couldn't dive anymore, he's like, I can't stay on an ODA. So group moved him to the dive locker, and so he was a DMT, dive medical technician there. And then after a while, I was like, I can't do anything that it takes to be a Green Beret, so I need to get out of the Army.
What year are we looking at here?
He got out in 2016.
Okay.
I think it was 2016. So then the dive locker hired him back as the civilian maintenance tech, and he kept working there. They just wanted to take care of him.
How'd the Army do with you during all this? Did they allow you to be with them, or were they
No.
still pushing you to deploy?
So they didn't make me deploy.
Okay.
When all this first kicked off and got the cancer diagnosis, obviously I told everybody in my unit, and they told me not to come to work at all. They're like, just don't come to work. Do what you need to take care of him. So I didn't. I took care of him, and around that same time period, 5th group opened up a position to put me in. They're like, hey, you can move to 5th group so that, we can just put you in a place where you can take care of your husband, take him to his appointments, and just do what you need to do without the cost to the 101st. I'm like, well, they would appreciate that, I'm sure, because I'm worthless right now. And simultaneously, I was also the battalion victim advocate. which was aggravating because I was getting phone calls while I was in the cancer clinic with my husband to go sit with a victim in an emergency room. I was like, I can't. I need to be with my husband
You're
right
being
now.
pulled all sorts
Yeah, I was
of
getting
directions.
pulled every direction.
Which the Army loves to do.
Yeah. So it just wasn't panning out well for me. But the 101st, apparently the request got sent up. It went up to the general, and apparently he was offended that 5th group thought they could take better care of me than 101st.
Oh, yeah.
So they're like, nope, she's not moving. We'll take care of her. And that's sort of a statement that just don't come to work. But literally, because he didn't die soon enough, they're like, well, you've already been off for several months. He's not dead. You need to come back to work. And at that point, I had to catch up on all the work I'd missed. Because I was a platoon sergeant at the time, and
Oh, wow.
I had a platoon. I had one of my E5s that had basically taken the platoon for me. And my PA was working the platoon as well. And they were doing okay, but they needed a senior NCO in there.
And that's kind of a pinnacle of a lot of careers, is like platoon sergeant is what you shoot for. I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It was.
And you're being pulled so many directions, and then you have that responsibility on your shoulders also,
Yeah.
Which should be smooth sailing. That's what you worked for your whole career. Now you're platoon sergeant. This is like the height of your career.
Well, it's funny. I was good at my job, and I'm a workaholic.
Okay.
I suffer from that. And so if you give me a mission, I'm going to accomplish it come hell or high water. So I was the platoon sergeant in the medical platoon. I was the battalion victim advocate. I was the battalion suicide prevention NCO and the battalion master resiliency trainer.
Okay.
So I had all of these hats. And pretty soon I was working 14-hour days while my husband's still fighting cancer.
Mhm.
And so I'm worried about him all day, trying to make sure he's eating, and yeah, it was rough. Eventually, so I was a E6 when all this was going down, and the promotion list came out though.
Okay.
And the promotion list came out when Andrew ended up going to the ICU. He was just bottoming out. One of the gene therapies had started failing, so they put him on a round of chemo. But something horrible happened. His lungs just turned into bloody goop, and he was coughing up water bottles full of blood every day. I was having to change it out every 2 hours. Just dump a bottle, give him a new one, and start hacking blood into. It's horrible. And his O2 sats the one day dropped down to 70. He was blue. So they called the ambulance. They took him straight to Vanderbilt, and he ended up in the ICU for about 2 weeks. And I thought he was going to die at that time.
At Vandy.
At
So you're
Vandy.
getting your primary care down in Nashville at that point, not on the
Yeah.
Fort Campbell at all.
Yeah, they pretty much were hands off with him once the cancer diagnosis hit, and everything was through Vandy.
Mm.
And plus, even when he got out of the Army, then he just fell under my insurance, and so he just kept getting seen at Vandy.
Okay.
But he was hacking up blood into this stupid water bottle, and he was kind of out of it. And I really thought he was going to die. His parents had come out to be with him during that too. But he started improving quite a bit. And the promotion list came out while he was in the ICU, and I'm with him. And I actually found out because the division sergeant major, one of the best leaders I've ever worked for in my life, Sergeant Major Vascarenas, if he ever watches this, amazing. He kind of had an eye on me for a while and seen how horribly I was being worked, and he knew about my situation, and he actually showed up in my office at 7 o'clock at night. He said, "Why are you still here? Doesn't your husband have cancer?" I'm like, "Yeah, he does." I'm like, "But I have all these things to do." So he'd been watching me, and as soon as the E7 list came out, he talked to my battalion sergeant major. He's like, "I want her in my office. I want her to work for MedOps." So as soon Sergeant Major Mascarenas came to the hospital to inform me, "Hey, congratulations, you made the 7 list." And he was like, "And you work for me now. So when you're done here, you're going to report to the division surgeon's office." It was that easy,
Clutch,
smooth, and
right.
awesome. And DivSurg took great care of me. They let me take him to all his appointments, but they gave me enough work to feel useful and have a job, which I needed. I didn't need to do nothing. I needed something to do with the flexibility I needed to take him to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave me that. And Andrew got quite a bit better, a lot better, back to running, back to being his crazy usual self despite the cancer treatment and stuff. But, it was sort of like this roller coaster where he'd get better We get really bad, and then we get a little bit better. We get here. We're not back where we were, but we're better. Worse. Not quite as good as we were. Like, it was this, like, slow downhill.
The fire.
Mm-hmm. And I was in battle staff. I had been going through battle staff. I was on my, like, last 2 days. And he'd been kind of spiraling. Like, he's forgetting a lot of stuff. And, like, he was very frustrated because he was still working at the dive locker and he kept having to redo work. And it seemed odd, but I didn't put anything together, right? Like, I'm just very forgetful right now. One day I got home from battle staff. Actually, no, I was at battle staff. I called him to see how he was doing. He'd stayed home, or he wasn't really up and moving around that morning. And so I called him. He was like, yeah, I didn't go in. I called out sick, which he'd never done up until this point.
Yeah.
And he's like, can you bring some oxygen tanks home for me from the locker? I feel like I need oxygen again. I'm like, okay. So swung by the locker, grabbed some tanks, went home. He's still in bed, which also hadn't happened before. I was like, you been here all day? He's like, yeah. I was like, all right. Well, I was on orders for West Point at this point as well. So we had a move coming up, and household goods was coming in a couple of days to pack up our stuff. So I was like, well, I'm going to go pack some stuff. You just stay here. You have your phone. I have my phone. Call me if you need anything, from the bedroom, so you don't have to scream. And he called me to ask me to help him to the bathroom, which also had never happened before. So I helped him up, helped him back to bed, and as I put him back to bed, he kind of looked at me, he's like, Rachel, would you feel better if I was in the hospital? I was like, would I feel better if you were? That's a weird question. Explain. And he's like, I just feel like if I were in the hospital, you wouldn't have to worry about me. I was like, well, if you're in the hospital, oh, and he was worried about me graduating battle staff. Like, he's like, I want you to be able to make it all the way through battle staff without having to stress about me and stuff. I was like, if you go to the hospital, I'm going with you. And so he's kind of like coming and hawing, like weird about it. And then finally he's like, Rachel, I think I do need to go to the hospital. I'm like, okay, I'll pack the go bag. We'll head that way. And then as I'm packing a bag, he looks at me again. He's like, Rachel, I'm not going to make it to the car. He's like, you need to call 911. I'm like, okay, I believe you. So I call 911. The answer, I'm like, hey, my husband needs to get picked up. He doesn't feel well. He has lung cancer. I don't really, like, is it an emergency? Like, I think so. But I didn't really know what it was. He was breathing okay. He just had this weird feeling.
Yeah.
He knew. So the ambulance comes and picks him up. We go to Fort Campbell, to the ER. And while we're there, they do an echo on, or not an echo, they do an EKG on him, and it looks like he's having a heart attack. So he gets life flighted to Vandy, to the cardiology floor, and they're going to do, I can't even remember what they're planning on doing, a stent or something.
Okay.
And he gets life flighted. He calls me from his doctor's cell phone. And he's like, hey, Rach, I'm going into the cardiac cath lab right now, and I bet I'll feel amazing after this. I'll finally get the relief I'm looking for. Because, these older guys at church have had this done, and they felt great afterwards.
So he's staying positive during all
He's
this,
staying
too.
super positive throughout this whole thing.
God bless.
So, we say our love yous. I call our families and let them know what's going on. And I get to the hospital as he's coming out of the cath lab. So I'm in the waiting room, and I see him go by. I'm like, oh, there he is. And the doctor comes out and starts talking to me. He's like, hey, ma'am, your husband, he's really, really sick. Well, at first he says his heart's perfect. There's nothing wrong with his heart. I'm like, well, that's good news. He's like, but he's really, really sick. I'm like, well, no shit, Sherlock. He's got stage 4 lung cancer. And he's like, no, he's really, really sick. And I was like, okay, got it. But when I see him go by, and I just keep sitting there, and nobody comes and gets me. I'm like, well, I'm going to go find my husband. So I go start walking through the recovery unit, and I finally find his room, and he is butt naked, fighting like 4 or 5 nurses and trying to rip his innovation tube out. I'm like I don't know what to do. Like, you got this scary naked man just battling people on the bed. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I start shaking. Like, I'm not going to get involved. I'm just going to go sit back down, and they finally come and get me, and they had him somewhat sedated, but I'm a medic. I walk in the room, and the first thing I look at is him. Second thing I look at is the monitor. I'm like, his blood pressure was like 40/15. I was like, how are you awake, let alone alive right now? And he sees me, like, I grab his hand and let him know I'm there, and he motions for a pen. because he's intubated, he can't talk. So I grab my notepad and a pen out of my purse and I hand it to him. And the first thing he writes is sedation, question mark. I'm like, not with your blood pressure, babe. I was like, no, you can't have sedation. If you get sedated, you'll die. Your heart will stop. And so he kind of nods. And then the next thing he writes is volume. Like he just felt like he wasn't getting enough oxygen.
Okay.
So I go back and forth with the respiratory therapists all night, and the doctor's like, he's not getting enough air. And they're like, he's on the maximum amount we can give him.
Really?
I was like, so it was rough, but
The crazy thing, he knows this medical stuff.
you know, he's still with it enough too, and to
It's almost like you
communicate.
don't want to know at that point.
You know, it gets even crazier. It's like I fell asleep with my head on his chest, and it was probably around 3 o'clock in the morning. I hear his breathing stop, and I hear his heart stop. And I wake up and I start ringing all the bells, and I call for a code, and they come and they do CPR on him. And they do CPR for a minute. And I'm just sitting in the hallway, like, this is it. This is it. It's over now. That man came back, woke back up. I went and grabbed his hand, and like, he'd already been through so much. I actually made a stupid joke with him. I was like, hey, babe, if you feel like shit, it's because you died and they did CPR. And he just nods. And then he kind of picks himself up off the pillow, and he makes super intense eye contact with me. And I'm like, what? And he's like, I love you, around the breathing tube. And he waited. And I was like, kind of still, I wasn't sure. I was like, well, I love you too. And he kind of like, this is like super intense eye contact me again. And then he nodded, and then he laid back down. His heart stopped 2 more times before he died. But that was the last time he woke up. It was probably another hour. His heart stopped again. They did CPR. He came back. And then the 3rd time, he was done. We broke the bank on bicarb on him.
So that was in Nashville. When was that?
That was February 2nd, 2017.
2017.
He died at 6 o'clock in the morning. I know, it's rough. I can tell the story without sobbing now, which is progress for me.
Yeah, it's intense. It's intense. I remember that, and I didn't know him. Obviously, I have friends that are very close to your ex-husband, and deployed with a team in 1st Battalion twice, actually. And I remember that distinctly. We came, and they had a big service at plethora at the chapel right there across the street.
His motorcycle parked up front.
It was Harley out front, yeah. I remember them calling his name, you know, of course, like we always do, and nobody speaks up, you know, empty man formation, whatever they call it, I don't even know right now. And then somebody out there, the bagpipes play, right? And I remember them firing up that Harley, and I'm like, Jesus, man.
You know, it was really crazy. Leading to that, 2 other guys on his ODA were killed, Scott Studeman and Jason McDonald, during the trip that he was supposed to go on.
Mm-hmm.
The proudest I ever was of Andrew was after those guys were killed, you know, Andrew flew to Dover. And he ended up being Scott's escort all the way to Arlington. But before he went, he had to get a cardiac cath. They had to drain one of his effusions. And so I'd taken him to the hospital. He was on a bed, he was getting sedated with fentanyl, and just literally had a catheter in his pericardium in excruciating pain. And he got up off that table, put his Class A's on, or his dress blues, and I took him to the airport, and somebody clearly who knew the situation had called ahead to the airport because he got met with a wheelchair that he refused to get into. And he got on an airplane and flew to Dover. And he never said anything about his cancer to anyone.
It wasn't the focus that he wanted there at the time.
No, it was about Scott and Jason.
Yeah.
But he stayed with Scott until his internment. And I was so proud of him for that. It's sort of unthinkable that you would get off of a operating table and put your blues on to do that, but that's what he did.
Yeah, I had to ride back on that flight. I was at Singleton at the time and rode back, and I don't think words were said during the entire thing. It was super awkward for me because I wasn't part of them at all.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
But that was always a hard thing for me too. And it was hard for him, and I am grateful to fifth group for this. It's like we went through multiple memorial ceremonies while he was alive, but while he had cancer. And we did the Gold Star ceremony out at Gabriel Field multiple times while he had cancer. And I knew it weighed on him, especially when he got out of the Army. He's like, I'm not going to have this. He didn't think he was going to get that ceremony, or if he did die while he was in that he was going to get the ceremony, which is hard on me. I remember when Mark Jones died from cancer. I remember watching Sarah and her son up there, James, like I'm going to be standing there one of these days. And watching that happen every single ceremony at Arlington, watching the internment, like I'm going to be standing where they're standing one of these days. And it's like
his name, his picture is on there.
His picture.
His team putting the coins on, you know.
Yep. But then when he got out of the Army, he didn't think any of that would happen. And I wish he knew that fifth group was going to acknowledge him in the same way they acknowledged all the active duty guys that had been killed in combat. It would have meant a lot to him. But now it means a lot to me.
Yeah. That's rough. So how did you reel back from that, or what do you do? Like, where are you at that point?
I drank a lot. So my best friend Jen, she had gotten out of the Army about a year, not even a year, a couple months before Andrew died. Her husband had also been killed in California. It was a homicide, and she was still reeling from that. And then Andrew died while she was sort of on her post-Army walkabout, and she bought a house here in Clarksville, so I moved in with her. I stayed in my house for a while, but it felt haunted. I had to get out. I just tried to start something new, and so I moved in with Jen, and we drank a lot. We drank a whole lot, and we spent our widow money on Amazon buying ridiculous stuff, and then opening the boxes, and then burning the boxes in a bonfire out back while we were drinking, and then we would order more stuff on Amazon while we were drunk. And we did that for a while. But honestly, it was good to be with a friend. And we'd have our little sobbing festivals. Like I'm having a crying day. I'm like, oh, I'll join you. Grab a beer, sit on the couch, cry for a while. But slowly we started seeing hope and optimism in the future. And then the current husband Levi during all of that. And yeah, it still hurts. But I'm so grateful for Levi because he lets me still love Andrew and isn't threatened by it. And, still lets me grieve when I need to. And I think every year he gets more and more of my heart as I move more away from the loss of Andrew, but I'm always going to love him. And he was such
can't not. Somebody that looks you in the eyes and tells you that this ever last, he probably mustered himself up for God knows all day. Who knows? And I don't mean to make it hard, but like from the outside perspective, like all that, he's just fighting to tell you that. Like he's like, no, I mean it.
Yeah, like actually picking himself up off the bed.
Yeah, that's intense. So yeah, before we get into Levi, because that's thank God, God provided you him.
Yeah.
In the midst of all this, right? A person that can understand and be humble enough to accept you and accept everything that comes with you, right? And then bring you in and try to understand you and make you grow past, your trauma and past all these experiences. That's a blessing right there. Do you think that the Army and the units, 101st, 5th Group, everybody involved institutionally really took care of you and watched out for you guys during this?
5th Group did.
Yeah.
The 101st didn't know what to do with me because I was their soldier and I was a widow. Normally it's their soldiers that are the ones who get killed and they're taking care of the family members. They didn't know what to do with a widow in their own ranks.
That's fair. I mean, God will do you. I mean, that's not an easy answer. I'm gonna say.
Send them to the rifle range into a CPR class and right back to the mission.
That's the answer.
I was still working for the division surgeon, and the leadership that was with me when he died, they were amazing. My section took good care of me. But, they started filtering out, and pretty soon the whole section consisted of people who never even knew Andrew. They weren't there for his death or his fight. and they didn't know what I was really going through. Like, they had this concept, right? But mostly I think people just got sick of hearing about it, even though it was still vastly impactful to me. And you get stabilized after the death of a spouse for 2 years.
Okay.
But I'll tell you this much, 2 years is not enough.
Really?
It's not enough. Because at least here at Fort Campbell, I had family, friends, I had a support network, I had my church. And then I get orders to take me out of all of that. All of that. Like, Levi was such a godsend.
They're plucking you out right now.
Yeah, like, you're done. Too bad you're still grieving and in therapy, but you gotta go now.
Yeah, your whole support
a new
infrastructure.
job and away from everything you've done. And I wasn't ready for that.
Were you focused on transition at this point? You're like, I'm done, or do you want to still carry out a career? Where are you?
While I was with the division surgeon, I wanted to carry out my career. I had aspirations for sergeant major at the time, and I wanted to go back to, or stay within force comm at least. You know, I wanted war and medicine. That's what I joined for. That's what I was passionate about. But my orders took me to MEPS. And everybody was like, oh, it's cool, it's a super sham job. It's not a sham job.
What's next?
Military entrance processing.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's where you first joined, right? I was from Cincinnati, and then we had to take a bus to Columbus. I remember people from all over the state.
Yep.
And then they in-process you into the military, right?
Yeah, that's MEPS.
Okay. Will you pause?
So,
All right, so we had to pause and take a break to eat. We were starving after the ride and 2 hours of podcasting. But we were getting to a point where all this craziness happened, right? And now you're assessing your life, your career, everything.
yeah. So immediately when Andrew died, I was really still, I was struggling with my performance, but I still definitely wanted to be in the Army. You know, I had made my 7, I was looking pretty good for the E8 board. My career had been really good up until this point. But I ended up on orders after the 2 years was up post-death that, you know, I was eligible to be moved. And so I had orders to MEPS, which is the military entrance processing station in Charlotte. And at first I thought it was going to be a good move. I was pretty enthusiastic about certain things because I was going to have a whole bunch of DA civilians that I got to lead, a combination of different forces. I was going to have Navy troops underneath me. I was like, oh, this is going to be really broadening. It'll be good. And I was going to be the medical NCOIC of the department at MEPS. So I was doing kind of medicine, right? It was a diagnostic center, essentially. You don't do any treatment. You just check people's hearing, check their vision, they do physicals, so I was going to have a bunch of doctors that were working there too. So I went there with pretty high hopes, and everybody was telling me it was going to be a really easy job, where I wasn't going to be working my butt off, and I'd have lots of time for school, and lots of time for a lot of things, and the break sounded great. And I found out that MEPS was an assignment that the Army gives people when they kind of feel like they need a break. So lots of back-to-back deployments, you'll go to MEPS, or death in the family, you'll go to MEPS to give you a break. When I got there, I realized it wasn't going to be a break very, very quickly. When I got to my section, it hadn't passed an IG inspection in like 5 years. So I was like, oof, I've got some work to do, and my civilian employees were absolutely miserable. But so were when I got there, the previous NCOIC and his assistant NCOIC were still on ground. And they actually stayed on ground for months after I got there. So it was like, oh, that's awesome. I get a nice right seat ride, and I get to learn all about the job. Those two were beaten half to death. They were miserable. And they were really hesitant to tell me what was going on in the MEPS. They wanted me to learn for myself, so they wouldn't taint my opinion of anything.
Okay.
But within a couple of months, I realized that the leadership was kind of impossible. The dynamic at MEPS was very, very difficult, especially for medical people, because medicine at MEPS specifically is a disqualifying section. Like, you don't get good news out of the medical section. You get, for the recruiter standpoint, you get disqualified in the medical section.
Okay.
Right? So if we're doing our job, we're making people mad. So we don't develop the standards that must they exist. Like there's regulations that the doctors go by and you're either qualified or disqualified, and then it's up to the service, the branch of service, whether they're going to accept a soldier or not.
All right.
But everyone around us from the leadership who's very accessions driven. It's just numbers, 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 and making the customer happy, which is recruiting command.
Okay.
They're all beating us to just push applicants through despite their medical problems or to overlook medical problems. And they're also pushing us to get more applicants seen faster. But if you see medical patients faster, you are more likely to miss things, which is probably the point. So it was sort of a rough assignment to be in. But I think the part that really started breaking my brain is my 3 commanders in a row looked me dead in the eyes and told me, I don't care what regulations say. As a senior NCO, I saw my job as being someone who's supposed to advise the commander, keep them on the right track, help them pass IG inspections, keep them out of trouble, and make sure the mission is getting done well. But when a commander looks me in the face and tells me they don't care what the regulations say, I don't really know how to do my job anymore.
Yeah, just give me numbers.
Yeah, and guidance, when you tell me that, like, okay, well then what is your guidance and your specific guidance and what you want? All the direction I was getting was very ambiguous. Like, you could take it any way you want, and they're always telling me, work in the gray area. Like, what does that mean? Like, if you tell me work in the gray area, that means I'm going to go do what I want.
Yeah, my gray area was pretty big.
Yeah, like, if you tell me to work in the gray area, honestly, I'm just going to go back to do what the regulations say.
Yeah, fair.
That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, you should. I'm sure you're a different soldier.
Otherwise, right? But I would never get that guidance. And they would tell me I was too rigid in my thinking. And then if I held my civilians accountable for not showing up on time or not working or doing something to standard, they would complain to the commander, and then I would get into the office and get my ass chewed for being too aggressive or not understanding enough, and then if I didn't hold them accountable, I would get pulled into the commander's office and chewed out for being a weak leader and not holding them accountable. It's like, what do you want? Which game do you want to play? I'll play your game. You just got to tell me what the rules are.
Yeah.
I never got the rules. And some of the craziest things I noticed in MEPS is the last 5 NCOICs of that section, myself included, all got command referred to behavioral health in a row. I was like, that's really odd. Like, and I met the previous NCOIC, like, he's a medic, right? We've all seen combat, we've seen some rough stuff, so we're a little tweaky, but all functional, all really good NCOERs previously. I was like, what happened here? My theory, and I have several theories, is that A, the command teams don't have enough to do. And so they would just get a little too involved in their sections, and they're not used to dealing with the combat side of the Army and the people that are produced from the combat side of the Army.
These are medical staff officers, I assume?
No, it's civilians.
Okay, yeah.
All my doctors were civilians. The only other military person in my section was my Navy H-1.
Okay. What was your command? That was another medic, right?
No, it was all, I don't know what it's called on the officer side, but like the 42 Alpha arena, so HR, human resources type stuff. And that's where the rest of MEPS came from, was HR type environment.
So you were a fish out of water automatically.
Very much so.
Last 5 NCOs in that position were referred to behavioral health.
And from what I understand, like based on the reasons they gave me for me being referred to behavioral health, it's for acting like a medic that came from the line unit. You know, there was a infantry marine that worked at MEPS, a lower enlisted kid. I got along with him the best because we would make jokes like if somebody told us to do something, he was always just like, kill it. And I loved it, right? Like, yeah, that's an acknowledgement of an order. And it made me laugh, and I guess I kind of spoke in similar ways sometimes when we would talk about very similar stuff, and it would deeply bother other people in our environment. They thought we were off our rocker, and maybe we are a little bit, but we're off our rocker in a normal way for the environment we came from.
Was it good, I guess, like, since you're reeling from all this, we're talking like maybe a year or more that you know, the death, your husband's death, and then you moving in Charlotte?
Was it good?
What was the time frame?
Oh, it was 2 years after he died.
2 years, okay.
Almost exactly 2 years before I reported to Charlotte.
Okay.
Like they cut my orders before my 2 years was up so that I could be moved at the 2-year mark.
All right. So it was obviously hard leaving here Fort Campbell away from your peer group,
Oh,
friends,
yeah.
and everything.
Yeah, 2 years is not nearly enough for the grieving period. I was still reeling from Andrew's death when I had those orders. And I left my church, I left my friends, my family was near here. So my whole support system got pulled out from underneath me as a result of moving at that 2-year mark. Maybe 2 years is enough for some people, but it certainly wasn't for me, and I didn't have a choice.
What do you think would have been the best answer? Because, yeah, the Army has these processes where they're just so fixated on a name and a number is going to HRC now, and this name and the number is going to recruiting or whatever. Do you think there's a better solution to that? Because it seems like, yeah, that's a name and a number, but we're dealing with people with unique scenarios and situations, right? And to pluck them out of that grieving process prematurely, with 2 different units involved here at Fort Campbell, plenty of work. I mean, how many soldiers at Fort Campbell? 100,000 people? I don't know, a ton. That it's just common sense that we would want to keep them and work to keep them, because ultimately all it takes is a phone call from some sergeant major to USAREC or HRC to be like, hey, we have 40 other candidates in America that can do this right now. She's the only one that's had her husband die and is reeling back from these deployments, have had numerous other issues happen where we don't need to necessarily move her right at a 2-year mark. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical, right? We need to look out for our soldiers, their mental health, their physical health, everything else.
I think the answer is to talk to the soldier, have an evaluation system, somebody from HRC or a medical provider, like mental health provider, just talk to them, like, where are you in this process right now?
Did anybody talk to you?
Oh, no, you just get orders one day. I was expecting them because they knew about the 2-year mark.
Mm-hmm.
And then, just sure enough, got an email from HRC, like, you expect orders.
So you obviously mentioned that you didn't want to go to your sergeant major or whomever, right, before, and then they pretty much didn't give it any attention.
I don't remember if I talked to them or not. I was sort of in an isolated place after, so it was interesting. When Andrew died, my replacement had already showed up to take over my job.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 2-year stabilization started. So I ended up with my dream job at Fort Campbell. I ended up working out at the Ryerson School of Combat Medicine.
Okay.
Out there.
Nice.
I loved that job. Loved it. It was in a bad part of my time period in my life, but I actually found a lot of healing in that job and being around other medics and people who are actually pretty comfortable talking about death. You talk about it a lot when your spouse dies, and so I've met some widows since then, and I can kind of tell how long it's been because of how often they bring up death. I'm like, oh, it's interesting. You bring it an uncomfortable amount, I think, for most people. But I was in a good place at that point. I was surrounded with very understanding people. Even my soldiers were really understanding. They're a good group.
What was the most beneficial group or structure, social structure, whatever, that provided you the most healing during that? Was it the church, the Army, the unit, friends?
That's hard to even put my finger on. Honestly, right after Andrew's death, I withdrew from the church a great deal. It's strange because I grew closer in my walk in my relationship with Christ. Like, I prayed so much more. I felt God's presence in my life a great deal more. Spent way more time in my Bible. But church was really hard for me because it's where I went with Andrew. Like, my church, I tried going to church, but I could hear him singing next to me. Or, imagine holding his hand in the pew next to me. And then it was a long drive. We went to church in Bowling Green, so we drive an hour from here to Bowling Green to go to church every Sunday. And that was an hour we'd spend talking about the sermon or talking about the week. And, that was a lot of time I got to spend with my husband, and I enjoyed it. And I remember trying to make that drive back alone and having to just pull over and sob for like 45 minutes. And I remember one drive in particular, I was speeding, hoping that a cop would pull me over just so I could have a hug. I was like, I just need a hug. I don't care if it's a state trooper. Like, I was in a bad spot. So church became very difficult. And even people offering sympathy and understanding sometimes is a little overwhelming. Like, you're kind of up and down during grief, where sometimes you want to talk about it and you want to sort of sit in your loss, and then other times you really don't. You want to, be up and out of it and talking about something completely different. And people don't know that they should match where you are and just meet you, whatever you're talking about, just be there with whoever's grieving. Instead of like, I have people come up to me when I was like in a happy moment, like, let's talk about death and your husband. Or if I was sad, talking about
they weren't meeting you.
Yeah, they're not meeting you. And it's difficult. It's sort of disruptive, I guess, and it causes more stress and more anxiety. And church is a place where you get that not meeting you where you are happening to you 100 times in a day. So I isolated a lot from church, which makes me sad because I stopped pouring into relationships that were really important to me, but relationships that existed when Andrew was alive were difficult for me to navigate after his death. Like, I don't know how to do this without him. And so I had to take a step back from old relationships, sort of get my feet back underneath me, and then go back and meet people again on this new ground for me.
As Rachel.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel him or were contacted by him, or you felt his presence with you?
I did. And especially right after he died, I felt, we used to go walk on the Greenway all the time. And I walked it a lot because Jen lived right off of it. And when I moved in with her, it was just right outside her door. So I'd go walk the Greenway. There was more than once where I felt like he was right next to me, holding my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And then one time I went to a prayer meeting at the SF Association, like at the team house, and I felt the same thing during our prayer there. And in retrospect, I'm not sure if it was him, or it might have been Christ, or an angel, or some other being, but it felt like him.
Nice. Yeah, I believe it, certainly.
Yeah.
So you're getting back on your feet, you're approaching life as Rachel now, trying to not redefine yourself, but just define yourself after all that, right? Because that was enough to bring you down off your feet. And now you're at this toxic environment down there. Have you started thinking about getting out, or are you still wanting to move forward with Army?
So my dreams went to Best to Die. I had hopes for E8 at MABS. I made the list when I was there. But after those interactions with my commander and just seeing the direction leadership in the Army seemed to be going, and how it was based on this, I'm going to steal a term I learned from one of my friends recently, that it wasn't about leadership anymore, it's about likership. Like, it was about how much your commander or your command team liked you.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to navigate in that type of army. It was never something important. It was about how well you did your job and did you take care of soldiers.
Things started getting really political.
They did. So political. Too political for me. I want to say stuff like it is, and I want somebody else to tell me like it is, and for us to make a decision that's clearly defined, and then we leave. I felt like we spent hours and hours in meetings talking about nothing and coming to zero conclusions.
Totally.
And always being in trouble for something that was also not clearly defined. I got so many counseling statements from my commander of, well, I don't even know what. I don't know what was on it. Like, what are your expectations of me going forward? There's nothing in here. It's all ambiguous and very feelings-based. And I can't navigate a feelings-based army either. Apparently, I have offended people too often. But, I've never seen myself as a hard leader. I just saw myself as a clear leader. Like, if you're screwing up, I would always take people into my office, tell them offline, not in front of people, like, hey, you're failing at this, this, and this. This is what I need to see from you going forward. Like, it doesn't help saying anything else, right? I'm not going to leave it for you to figure out, like, you're bad at this, figure out how to get better. But that was the feedback I was getting. It was like, I didn't realize I was bad. Tell me how I can improve. And like how ambiguous the political system was, how weird communication was. As I made the E8 list, I was like, there isn't a single daggone first sergeant job in this army that I want anymore. I can't lead like this. I can't lead under these types of conditions and with these expectations. Like, I'm going to lose my career over it.
And as you go up and you start to see dirty it is. Like at a certain rank, right? The senior enlisted, freaking 04 and above, largely just malleable, passive aggressive, and they don't want to issue clear orders, commander's intent, mission statement, whatever, because they don't want that on paper anywhere. That way, if their subordinates do something outside of their line of ethics or whatever they see is appropriate at that time, then they can just hammer you, throw the NCOs out to dry under them.
Yes, that's what I started seeing is like there was always ambiguous guidance so that no matter which way it went, if it went well, they take credit for it. If it went poorly, it was the NCO's fault and they could throw under the bus.
Yeah, their whole little ribbon rack over here that was built from those NCOs, conducting these missions for them. And largely, they probably just provided red tape during these missions anyway. They probably, a lot of them didn't assist too much, let's be honest.
Well, and I found too that, at this point, I had almost 18 years in the Army. So I'd been a platoon sergeant, I'd been in combat 3 times, I'd worked in a lot of scenarios, I ran a school. And I had a pretty glowing career at this point, and I was spoken to like a child. And my expertise that I would offer in my field weren't listened to. Like, it didn't matter. So I felt like a giant PD7, and I felt like there was no place for me in that environment at all anymore. I felt worthless. And honestly, I know that I wasn't. And I know this because within 6 months of me being there, we passed the IG inspection, and I had a happy staff, and we're getting the mission done. And like, to me, those are milestones for success, right? Like, all right, we're functioning where we're supposed to, we're accomplishing the mission, and my staff isn't miserable. Those are my 2 things that I wanted to do, and I got it done. And at that point, I was like, all right, now I just gotta keep this bus rolling.
Yeah, let's keep moving.
Right? And I told my commander that, and she told me, she's like, nope, now you need new goals. Which ones? What do I need to do now other than just keep this going? But she was kept repeatedly telling me, like, that's not enough. Like, what do you want me to accomplish now? And it was always more bodies, fewer disqualifications. Like, that's outside my control. I can't do that.
Yeah, you work with that.
I can make this much cake with this much flour. If you want more cake, you gotta give me more flour.
Yeah.
So at that point, my enthusiasm definitely started dwindling, and I started envisioning my future in the Army, and I was like, I'm going to be miserable. And at this point, my mental health provider had already offered me a med board, as I was pretty miserable after I grew up, especially in the Army. It was difficult. A lot of the Army actually became just a reminder of him. We met in the Army, we served together. It's like every time I saw somebody in uniform, I saw him in ways. I talked to these kids at MEPS that were coming through that would remind me of him. And it was painful. It was really, really painful. So leadership was going downhill from everything I could see. The best leaders I know were ending up under investigation for absolute nonsense. Usually for holding people accountable for not doing their job.
Always the good leaders.
Good leaders.
Yep. And the shitheads make it up.
Even before I made it to MEPS, I saw it a little bit in the 101st, just with promotion lists.
Yeah.
Right? I'd see all these other U7s that I knew took really good care of their soldiers, did their job well, and knew their shit. And then the promotion list would come out. They were never on it.
You're like,
It was always the NCOER patterns. People are just using their soldiers to make themselves look good.
Yep.
They made it. And I was like, almost felt offended that I made the E8 list, honestly. Like, oh, I gotta look at myself. I don't know if I want to be on this list. It's like, oh, I gotta take a look at myself and make sure I'm a good leader. Yeah, and that's sad when that thought literally crossed my mind. I wasn't proud of it. I was like, I don't know if I want to be on the same list as some of these other names I see here.
It's common practice here. I mean, God, for the last 8, 9, as long as I can remember, really, that guys don't even want to be on the list for EA and SF. Nobody wants to be a team sergeant. You're getting extra $300-400 to do all that extra responsibility, and now you're just managing humans. And your IG, make sure your computer training's up to date tomorrow. Make sure you have a shot next Wednesday, rather than actually conducting missions, driving a team, managing people.
That's where the military is frustrating to me, is that you go in doing what you love.
Yeah.
And you get to do what you love
For a bit.
pretty long, pretty decent amount of time, maybe 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got this carrot, it's your retirement dangling in front of you.
And they know it.
And as you chase that carrot, now you get to be miserable to get it. Absolutely miserable.
Computer desk, PowerPoint, the whole deal.
Yeah.
It's torture.
Awful. And when I was at MEPS, which is so crazy, because I left Force Com, where I worked at a school that simulated combat, right? We had body parts strewn all over the place, explosions going off every day. We're doing medical stuff, right? Stuff that you think would be triggering to me with all the medical, like, horrific things I've seen in the past. It didn't trigger me at all.
Was that oddly calming?
It was therapeutic. It was in a controlled environment. I had something to offer there. I had experience, and I could train people. Like, hey, I've seen this in real life. This is what you're gonna have to deal with. I go to MEPS, and I'm glued to a computer or at a desk or at a table in a meeting, and I'm crunching numbers for who knows what purpose, the one that probably doesn't even make sense anymore, and trying to wrangle civilians who honestly had been doing the job, most of them for 20 years, knew their job perfectly well. I had nothing to teach them or offer them about their job.
Yeah.
And most of them are twice my age and had retired from the military themselves. Like,
You're not saying much.
what do you want me to do with them? Yeah. Like, other than I'd show up and be like, hey, how can I make your jobs easier today? And I think that's what made them happy. And they did their jobs well. So
that you cared.
Yeah, that's it. Like, have you eaten lunch? Want lunch? Get some coffee for everybody. They're happy.
Yeah.
My employees were not the problem. Leadership was.
So you wanted out of there. No, when did you start making the decision with that med board?
COVID. When COVID hit.
Yeah, why?
So many reasons. When COVID hit, it's a virus, right? We don't know much about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a medical and COIC. I've dealt with viruses before, and I've dealt with vaccination programs before. I know stuff about medicine, and at least I know a little bit. And all of a sudden, all this weird guidance started coming out about masking and like the distancing. I'm like, I have never heard of this before.
Completely made up.
This is weird. Like, since when? Like, me and the doctor sat down before we had any guidance come from the DOD, and we're like, okay, wash your hands. If you're immunocompromised, maybe work from home for a while until we find out how bad this is. And that's the guidance we gave. But then all this other stuff started coming up. And then people just took it in a weird direction. It's like, for a while, we were putting on gloves to take our own temperature on a thermometer that actually needs to, your body needs to be in the room for like 20 minutes in order for it to get an accurate temperature. But people are just walking in cold weather, just with gloves on, even though they had touched all the elevator buttons and every door handle up there. You gotta put gloves on. It's so, and the rules didn't make sense. They're insanely inconsistent. And anybody who had any kind of cold or allergy symptoms, we're putting them in like a gym and locking them in.
Yeah, right. Looking at them, suspect,
They were making them put on gloves. So I was just watching this. I was like, and all the medical common sense stuff that I've done my whole career, I'm speaking it into a void of panic and chaos. And to say, like, this medically doesn't make any sense, y'all. Like, and stop freaking out. Like, we're sending people home for 2 weeks that have no symptoms of anything because they pop positive on some tests, and we're still freaking out. Like
a PCR test in which the creator of the PCR test doesn't even agree with it being used to such a level, to magnify COVID to the point where everybody, if you looked hard enough, would have certain traces of it in their body. The own creator of the test. But we just threw out all logic and common sense.
Well, and mask effectiveness, right? That was one of the first things I started counseling my commander on too. It's like, if you want to put masks on people, it has to be an N95 with a respirator. That's the only thing that's going to do anything at all, kind of, for the most part.
Yeah, the rest is just
little surgical masks do nothing. They stop particulate from going out of your mouth onto other people. That's what those are for. Or to prevent blood splatter from getting in your face.
And they make the sheep feel better.
Yes.
But how quick and easy was it to make the sheep in the army just go with it? Because I didn't hear many people at all in leadership that talked bad about it, or not even talked bad about it, that fought against it.
None. They just signed on. I wouldn't. It was too stupid and too crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
It was ridiculous. And
all a bunch of yes men.
When my mental health was suddenly questioned by the leadership, and I got command referred to behavioral health. Was around the COVID time.
Oh, you're not towing the line anymore. Yeah, we
Yes.
gotta look at you here.
Well, and I also failed the likership test
Oh, okay.
in a significant way, I'm afraid, because I say no a lot more than I think some people like to hear.
Yeah, it's a new feel-good armor.
If something's stupid, I will say, that's stupid, we shouldn't do that, and that hurts people's feelings when I say the word stupid. So, the Army just, during COVID, it got insanely difficult for me to navigate, especially being medical. So that was pushing me more towards the, I need out. I need out. The way leadership was going, COVID went, and watching how sheepish everybody became. Like,
Yeah.
I am surrounded by literally no one who's going to stand up for what's right.
Forcing the vaccine down your throat, saying if you don't get it, you're done out of the Army. So many people, seasoned operators I know in SF,
Yeah.
just done. Or we had to hide them off to the sides. That way, command couldn't get it because they were a year out from retirement. And command literally didn't stick up for any of them. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
They didn't.
Well, additionally, when I was in the 101st, I did a lot with the vaccine program, so the flu vaccine every year. And doing that, VAERS was sort of my jam, right? I was always checking VAERS, and I knew a lot about the VAERS program.
What does it stand for?
The Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System.
Okay. Yep.
Vaccine Adverse Events, yes. So if anything bad happens after you've had a vaccine, even if it's just a minor allergic reaction, like you get a rash, providers will log on to VAERS, or a nurse or some other medical professional will file a report. It's very time consuming. And there was a study done on VAERS. I can't remember who did it. I want to say it was Harvard, but I'm not sure. But that VAERS underreports by 100-fold or something ridiculous like that. Like, it's crazy how underreported.
Because a lot of people don't even want to do it.
Yeah, it's time consuming.
Yeah.
So as soon as the COVID vaccine came out, first of all, it sounded squirrely. It was experimental, right? And like, I've heard of experiments that have been done in America before, and I don't really know.
Yeah, like Tuskegee, syphilis. I mean, let's just go down the line here. Hundreds of them.
So my first impression was like, I'm just going to wait and see what VAERS does. VAERS exploded when that vaccine rolled out with injuries and death.
And over 4 incidents, it immediately would be taken off.
Yeah, I think
typically.
it's 4.
Yeah, I think it's 4.
Yeah, it's a really low number, and it was in the hundreds within a week. And I was like, okay, somebody's surely looking at this. Like, this can't continue. It certainly can't be forced. But all this data was getting ignored. And when it came to medical data, or even accessions data, or how my section functioned, I would set data in front of people and explain it to them. I'd even put little pictures on for people and make them PowerPoint presentations. And it was like talking at a brick wall most of the time. Like, they didn't want to hear data. Like, this is going to help you make good decisions, but they didn't care.
No, they just want to hide under the radar, subsist for a couple years until it blows over, don't affect their career and their retirement, and then move on to the next rank.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good job. If that's who you are, good job, man. You're just fighting for the good fight, enjoy your retirement.
And I didn't want to be in the Army anymore. I didn't want to be in it. And so once I got the command referral to behavioral health, which I do agree with you, I think it was for not towing the line, for saying no too much, and for not agreeing with the COVID measures that we were putting in place and being probably too vocal about it for their taste.
You're like, screw this.
Yeah, so I was all about it. My commander even asked me before she put it in, she's like, I want to refer you to behavioral health. I'm like, do it.
Sold.
Done. Let's go. Let's do this, jam. So I got the referral. I went to a PTSD program for like 2 weeks, which was lovely. I met some really wonderful people in that program, which incidentally were mostly senior officers and NCOs that didn't toe the line.
Yeah, there you go. It's like the rehabilitation, or whatever they want to call it, the re-indoctrination camp.
Now, most of us had seen pretty horrific and traumatic stuff in combat, but we had a little bit too much in common other than trauma. So I did that and then started my med board. And it's heartbreaking in a way because I got out at 18 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
2 years.
And you're going 50-50 retirement system the rest of your life.
But I wasn't going to take that vaccine. That shot was killing people, and who knows what the long-term effects of it are. And the data was everywhere for it. Additionally, it's a vaccine for COVID, which I'm pretty sure I had, and it gave me like I was a little sweaty and fatigued for like 24 hours.
Yeah, cold
And
virus.
That's it.
Which mutates. I mean, it's just completely nonsensical.
None of it made sense. None of it. And so I wasn't going to take a vaccine for something I didn't need to be vaccinated against.
Yeah.
That would probably kill me in the long run anyway. Not doing it. So
you're
really
charging forward, getting the hell out, right?
Yeah.
Now, what do you see yourself doing during all this?
Well, it was pretty amazing. Like while I was still on terminal leave, opportunities just started opening up. And the only thing I did to open up these opportunities was update my status on LinkedIn.
Okay.
That's it. Available to work, retired from the Army, put the date on there and stuff.
Veterans, if you're looking for work.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, apparently.
But it was funny, it was people that I'd worked with in the Army that had retired themselves and started reaching out to me.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my friends from the medical community, he reached out to me and was like, hey, I got this really cool job for you. I was like, oh, send it. Well, he's like, you're still in Charlotte, right? I'm like, yeah, I'm still in Charlotte. And he's like, we're doing this training in a week. Can you come? It's paid. I'm like, yeah, I'll be there. It was a cadaver training. It was really cool. There's a company that did perfused cadavers, so they pumped blood back through them, and they had this really cool system that gave them a pulse. So we basically made them look like they're alive for like, surgical technicians to work on and trauma teams and stuff like that. So I worked with them for a little bit.
Okay.
And through that job, one of my coworkers there got me hooked into Raw and Stage. And so then I picked up that job. And I'm working on my master's degree right now. And I don't want to be glued to a computer all day though, so I needed something else to do in addition to working on my master's.
Something tangible.
Master's part-time, and I decided to be a butcher's apprentice with the rest of my time.
Okay. What drove that decision?
Hunting. Hunting, yeah. My husband and I, we bought land here in Tennessee.
Okay.
We got like a good 16 acres, most of it's wooded, and there's some deer on there, and I want to eat them.
Okay.
But if I'm going to shoot them, I want to cut them up real nice before I eat them.
Yeah.
So that's my goal.
Make good use of them. I agree. It is it's something fun, and like you said earlier about this, like finding that meat, procuring it naturally, right? If you can kill a deer, which is like a ninja in its environment, especially with a bow 20, 30 meters away, in its environment that it lives every day, it smells, it looks around, it hears everything, right? You can kill that animal and then harvest it and then use basically everything of it that's palatable. That's very respectful to that animal's life and everything. It's very natural. It's healthy for your body because that animal subsisted on the environment.
Yeah.
It's very wholesome.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what have you hunted yet?
Not on my property.
Okay.
I haven't hunted since I was a kid.
All right.
I come from a pretty robust hunting family on my mom's side.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was a little kid, I did it with them a little bit. But I always wanted to. While I was in the Army, I just couldn't find the time to do it.
Yeah, I had that same problem, even as a hunter.
Yeah, it's difficult to scavenge enough time out. So by the time I was making enough money to buy like a hunting rifle and had the resources to go hunting, now I had no time to do it.
Yeah, that's fair. So where did you end up meeting your current husband, Levo?
Oh, we went and met on the interweb.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we met on
Okay.
Christian Mingle.
Really?
Yeah.
So a success story. You're looking for good people.
Yes, it took a lot of trial and error to find a good one, though. I went on some weird dates.
At Christian Mingle?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So I bet there's some
Really
weirdos
weird
on
stuff
there.
on Christian Mingle. Not everybody's definition of Christianity is the same as mine, I guess.
Like, why is our first topic of conversation about bondage?
Yeah, there's some weird stuff on there. You run into some weird people.
I bet.
So I went on some bizarre dates, but honestly, what turned most people off of me was the fact that I was a widow.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a lot of people found that really threatening, especially I think because Andrew was Special Forces.
Yeah, you're trying to live up to a Green Beret dive guy. I mean,
Yeah, I
Good
mean,
luck.
he was epic. So
yeah.
it's something you really can't live up to unless you're doing the same thing.
Yeah, you shouldn't try to.
Honestly, being a Special Forces spouse is not the easiest thing in the world.
No, kudos to you.
I signed up for it because I loved Andrew and I loved him well before he was Special Forces. I don't think I'd voluntarily sign up for that again. So Levi, I saw him online, and he was from Washington, where I joined the Army. But it said he was living in Nashville. Well, he hadn't moved to Nashville yet. He was still up in Washington. But we started chatting, and it was interesting because he has zero ties to the military. None. He's never been in. He's who doesn't really have any family in, didn't know anything about it. And something about that gave me a lot more optimism for my life outside of the military. You know, it's coming up. I was within a couple of years of my retirement when I met Levi. And talking to him made me see all the possibilities for my life and what I can do with it on the other side of it.
Okay.
So Levi helped my transition be far less scary. And he was very encouraging with whatever I really wanted to do. Work in a butcher shop, work in a butcher shop. Contracts are exciting. He thinks I should be a journalist, but
Does
he does. I think I should be a statistician.
he? So he accepted all that stuff that came with you, right? And then he supported you in your transition moving forward.
Yeah.
So that support network, whomever it may be, a spouse, friend, church, could be a military unit that's supportive.
Yeah.
I guess would be a critical aspect of moving forward during that phase,
Yes.
at least to you.
For me, and then I have another smaller network of, I've got 3 girlfriends that were all Army medics.
Okay.
And we've stayed in really close touch. We actually met in Enoch, like way back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 2010. And we got really close. We've stayed in contact all these years. And half of us are out now. And so Jen was the first one to go, and she sort of kind of talked through her transition. And so we're sort of an advice support group. And love each other across the miles. One of them's in Germany right now. The other one's over at Fort Stewart. And then Jen's here in Clarksville. And now I'm out. And, you know.
Do you think that the Army, so you committed 18 years, deployments, seen, all this pain, you've seen ups and downs, right? And let's not make it all this bad experience because, it made you who you are, which is a pretty phenomenal person. That's why I wanted to be on this first podcast as soon as I met you, right? You have an awesome story. Immediately when I saw your work, I'm like, that's a freaking good soldier. That's a good NCO, right? Just straight up, you exude that confidence and professionalism. So do you feel that the Army, institutionally recognize that at the end of the day? And of course, it's not all one-sided. They don't just do everything wrong. Of course, that institution and the people in the Army built us into great individuals, I think.
Yeah.
If you play basketball, Jordan, you're going to be good at basketball one day, right?
Yeah.
So I think being around all these great, the SF team, the great medics, RASCON, all these different environments that you worked in, right? And you've seen professionalism. It brought you up. It leveled you up to a place that if you stayed in Washington or North Dakota or wherever, and you were at your age right now and you never left, you wouldn't be the same person.
No, correct. And
Completely
I
different.
definitely don't regret my service.
Mm-hmm.
I am heartbroken that the Army has changed in the ways that it has. I feel like there is a change in the environment or in the values or definitely in the leadership and the expectations. And I feel like that change started happening somewhere around 2014, 2015 maybe even a little earlier.
I agree.
But it started snowballing into this really bizarre thing that I don't know what it is anymore. I don't know how to navigate it. It used to be easy to be a good NCO. Do your job, take care of your soldiers, know the regulations. That would definitely put you ahead. But do your job, take care of soldiers. That's how you were a good NCO. And it's not that anymore. It is definitely not that. You have to be a liar and a politician. You have to. They have built an army where you cannot succeed if you don't lie. And that's a difficult army to navigate too, an impossible army to navigate.
And take no responsibility.
Yes.
And then shoulder all the responsibility on those subordinates under you, but then hang them out to dry whenever they're not valuable to you anymore. And pretend like they never existed.
Yeah. And I kind of want to expound on the lying part too. And I think a great example is all the training that's required. Right? Didn't they do a study on it where if you did all of the mandatory training, it would take 400 days or something?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, they did some.
That's ridiculous.
They compiled all of it to see how long it would actually take if you actually sat there.
If you actually did it, yeah.
Right? And so you have all these unreasonable expectations, right, laid on you. And you go tell your commander, I cannot physically accomplish all of these things to standard. I cannot do this. It's impossible. And they look at you well, you have to. It can't be done. This isn't boot camp, where you're playing the little uniform games, or you've got 2 minutes to be in full dress uniform and back out here. You're gonna fail. Okay, I played those games when I was private. I'm not private anymore. I want you to know that these all can't be done. You need to pick one or prioritize them, what you want me to focus my efforts on. But they're not all going to get done. And they just keep telling you they all have to get done. Or else it's your career on the line. It's you as an SEO on the line. And then they throw that in your face, like, get it done, sorry. Like, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
tack on the sergeant part of it.
Mm-hmm.
As if I'm not living up to my expectations.
And, it's funny, I called a couple people out on this when they dissed me because they would throw out the, oh, do you want me to come show you how to do your job? I'm like, yes, please.
Yeah,
Please come do it for me. I will learn so much seeing you do this. And they never would. They never took me up on the offer to come do my job for me and show me how it would be properly done. But
I think we saw an infection. Like, if you look at like Yuri Bezmenov, the doctrine, he was a Soviet spy who fled to America during the Cold War, and then he pretty explicitly said, like, hey, the system that the Soviet Union or Russia is doing to instill, and China has a large part in this also, to subvert America and our institutions, our systems, and in our approach to government and the trust between the people and the government, right, was to gradually instill communist idealism into the education system, into the judicial system, and into the government. So that's taken its time, but it's very evident. You got to be freaking blind or dumb if you can't see that in America. But now we're at a point, and I totally agree, there was like a phase, like 2014-ish, 13, 14, 15, where it was pretty profound. Like, it's being plugged in there from the outside. And we all started to see just a gradual deterioration of the Army, of the values that made the Army. Discipline, absolutely. It all became political. Nobody really has a heart in the game. And fifth group, I know we had an absolutely terrible retention. Terrible. Nobody wanted to be a part of it because we saw command throw dudes to the side for just made up bullcrap, when they weren't useful, not looking out for their soldiers. It was a complete epidemic in fifth group, and it still is. And we just saw this happen over the years, and then we saw the gradual politicization, and you have stud x-rays joining the Army, college degrees, just kicking butt in their career, stay in 5, 6, 7 years, and they're like, dude, I'm not being a part of this. I got my whole life ahead of me. You think I'm going to stick around in this freaking environment?
Yeah.
Hell no, who would?
Yeah, I lost all of my best soldiers, and I can't blame them. They all got out.
Why?
They were smart, they were driven, and they had no place to take their intelligence or their drive.
Yeah.
And I was already like reaching for that carrot, but I was like, hey man, you're smart, you're driven, get out. Like, this isn't the place for you.
Make 3 times as much on Wall Street. You do the same political bullcrap and make more money.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's so hard to put your finger on it. I think you're right. I think it's weird ideologies started being introduced. But there's also that politicism and that ambiguity, I think, is what kills me. The first time I met ambiguity, I was up at division headquarters, and we were trying to get money from the division to achieve some task. I can't even remember what it was, but we had all of these ducks in a row. Like, this is the benefit to the mission. This is how much it's going to cost. These are the people it's going to impact if we get this money and we can apply it here.
Okay.
And we had to go talk to the chief of staff or something. And we were in his office for an hour. And I'm not dumb. I don't think. I think I'm a pretty intelligent person. But I left the office and I had to ask everybody with me. I was like, what did he say? He talked for an hour straight, but I have no idea what the man said.
Going in
It was
circles.
just he didn't say anything. Nothing. Did we get the money? Did we not get the money?
I know a politician like that. Yeah.
It's the worst.
Sometimes it even sounds good the whole time. You're like, wow, this guy's a great communicator. And you're like, what the hell did we talk about?
Yeah, you just don't know. And the first time I heard that, I was just baffled. It's like, that's leadership? That's this level of leadership? I can see why they take so much time to do everything and make any decisions, because they spend a lot of time talking about nothing.
You're right. So now you're moving on. Do you feel that the Army, now that they know you're going out, right? Do you feel like them, the VA, whomever, right, that's responsible for this med board, now you're retired, right, from the Army? So the same as me. Do you feel that they set you up for success?
They put a lot of effort into some really wrong places, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was getting constant phone calls from the VA about things that were really, really basic. Like, have I checked out this guide or this guide online? Or we have this like brochure for you, or like how to go to college. And it's sort of funny, is my college actually does the same thing. I don't know if you go to the same one I do, but sometimes they call me like, do you need help with enrollment? Like, I'm working on my master's. I've been with you through all of my degrees up until this point. I know how to enroll. Like, you can leave that alone.
Yeah.
And I feel like the VA kind of does the same thing, where they're just beating the really, really simple things to death and completely missing the mark on other areas, like insurance, right? I was talking to you about this earlier. Like, I have TRICARE. I pay for it. I don't really know how to use it though. Like, I've never had to navigate the medical system outside of the VA. The VA is pretty easy. I take my ID card and I go there. But I also have this supplemental insurance to use elsewhere, and I don't really know how to use it. I just went to the doctor. I'm going to see if I have to pay for it or not. Hopefully it works out. But I feel like a lot of it's sort of shooting in the dark. And I still haven't gotten my Montgomery GI Bill benefits. I filled out the form twice, submitted it online. I've taken 3 classes. I've paid for them out of pocket. Wait for back pay eventually.
There's a class action lawsuit on it right now.
Is there really?
Same issue, yeah.
But it's like, who do you call about something like that, right? Just not really a resource available. And I had when I was still living in North Carolina, right when I retired, there was a state representative that reached out to me. And I sat down with them, and they helped me file some claims that I didn't really need to file because I got medically retired. So everything was already filed. But now, I don't know who to talk to about similar things. Like, there's a lot of resources thrown at you, but you don't really know what all of them are for.
Or what they are.
Okay, so what do I call you for? I know you're a resource, and you've told me to call you, but I don't know what to call you.
Regional Veterans Health Representative.
Yeah, you're like, what do you do?
What's that?
Yeah, so there's lots of resources, but actually connecting them to the need and just like a grasp or understanding of what they do or what they are, that's challenging. And I feel like the number of resources are almost overwhelming. Like, I don't know which one to call for any variety of issue I might have.
It seems like the government just threw a bunch of money around into this giant system. It's like this big pool, and nobody really quite knows where to plug in at. It may even be out there, these institutions or programs that can help.
Yeah, but where do you even start searching? And like if you Google stuff, you're not going to find that. And then even the systems we do have are difficult to navigate.
Yes.
Like logging on, right? Like with the IDV thing, and then you go to va.gov.
It's all different.
Like you get like 5 or 6 different logons, and you're like, okay, it turns out none of these are what I need. Well, shoot, now what? Well, and then, gosh, don't change your phone number or your name.
Because everything's tied to that,
Yeah, like the secondary authentication thing, I have been trying to log on to DFAS, and I can't because I changed my phone number, and I had my password, and I changed my phone number when we moved because my old phone didn't have any reception here, so we had to change service. And since everything was tied to my old phone number, I got locked out of all my accounts. And it's secondary authentication. Like, I called to get it reset. But then there was other things, like there's a date, right? It's not your retirement date. It's the date on the back of your ID card. I guess it's when your benefits kicked in. Okay, so on one of the, confirm your identity things on the phone when I was trying to get my DFAS password set, they asked me when I was eligible to receive military benefits. And this is so basic, but I didn't know. And so I told them my retirement date. It wasn't my retirement date. It was the benefits date on the back of my ID card.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Now you know. But I failed authentication because I gave them the wrong date. So now I'm just stuck. I can't log into DFAS anymore.
How dare you?
I don't know. And then because I failed that, they gave me some special guy's number here at Fort Campbell to call who's never answered his phone ever.
Yeah, sounds typical.
Well, it's taken me 5 phone calls to HRC, and I've mailed my marriage certificate, my social security, everything up to HRC twice just to get my name changed. Still not changed.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have 2 names. On one side, I have one last name. On the government side, I have another last name. It's confusing.
That'd be the hard part about being a woman, is that
Last names, yeah.
last names.
I'm starting to understand why so many women I know just decided to keep their last name, but I'm a traditionalist. I wanted my spouse's last name.
That's fair.
But now I have 3 names to navigate now, because some things in the government are actually my maiden name. I made my first one. Yeah. I got 3 names to figure out.
Well, do you feel that during this whole process, and now, even that we're out, I think that we just kind of get thrown, because once you're not useful to the unit, and God bless it, the unit's the unit, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has to worry about war fighting functions, or it should. Now it's worried about, 72 different genders and not saying the wrong words, and definitely not fighting a war with China and Russia, right? Nothing pertinent. But it seems like once you're kind of out of the mix, we don't want to deal with her anymore. Get her off to the side, right? Get him off to the side. Now the unit continues to march on. You're out of the system now. You're in the VA or whatever, doing your own thing. Do you think that politicians or our leaders, right? Do you think they actually understand that big transition? Do you think they actually care about us as a whole?
No.
Because they're talking about veterans just in the last 20 years. Let's not even talk about Desert Storm, Kosovo, nothing else, right? Operation Urgent Fury, the Cold War, like all these other past conflicts, Korea, Vietnam, right? All these veterans. Let's just talk about Iraq, Afghanistan, right? Throw Syria in the mix. It's a small amount of dudes, but still, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at 20 years of just constant veterans, right? Out there in America right now, millions and millions of veterans who've given their all, right? And the vast power and voice that we should have, but it seems like our voice is this big. Nobody gives a shit about veterans. They just throw them off to the side. Oh, that's cute. He might have PTSD or he might have these issues, but nobody really wants to hear our voice. There is no unified voice. And guess what? I don't think they want a unified voice for us. They don't want that. Because we're the people who actually stood up, defended, raised our hand, served bad guys overseas because of values that America represents, not to support the state and the government. I don't think a lot of veterans give a shit about that. We care about the Constitution, right? Protect and defend the values of the Constitution. And I think because of that sacrifice, we are entitled to a pretty strong voice in the governance of our country. But I think that the government of our country has attempted to stifle that voice as much as they can because they don't want us having a unified voice or any kind of power that goes up against what they want, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. And sadly, I think, how they always said that the army just reflects what happens in society, and that weird decline that we started seeing in the 2014 timeframe, that's late coming. Our society is much, much worse than that. The army was slow to catch up.
I like that perspective.
And I think politicians are too detached. I think helping veterans is just a buzzword for them to make themselves feel good, like wearing a mask.
I do too, yeah. Wear a little flag on their suit.
Yeah, so I support the veterans. Like, okay, do you though? Do you really? It's aggravating. I honestly think the best support that we have is going to come from within. Like, we have to help each other because we're the only ones that really get it. And it's funny, especially, the history of mental health and struggles with PTSD. The only therapists that have helped me not only, but the ones that seem to get it are the ones that have been, that have seen combat themselves and have walked that road.
Okay.
Now, there have been some rare, really good, empathetic civilian providers I've met too that just have a good head on their shoulders and they're able to relate without being shocked out of talking to you because of death and killing people. Because that happens a lot too. I don't know if you've dealt with that. You tell a therapist that you killed someone and they're just straight back up. Oh, well, I suddenly feel very uncomfortable talking to you now based on your response. That's not good.
What do you want me to say here?
It's true, I'm a soldier. That's the thing we use sometimes. Sorry. But when you make your therapist obviously uncomfortable, but I think as a whole, veterans make politicians uncomfortable too.
Definitely.
In the same way, and possibly for some of the same reasons.
Because veterans are some of the most real people I've ever met, at least.
Yeah.
Definitely. And politicians are the complete opposite.
Yeah. And just saying things like it is, it's going to turn them off, and that's what folks are supposed to do.
Yeah, that's true. Well, what is your take? Then I want to ask this out of everybody who comes on the show after you did 18 years.
I did.
U.S. Army, okay? Multiple combats, veteran. What is your take on war?
I think war is necessary. I think the wars we've fought have been absolute bullshit. I joined the Army and I went to war believing at the time that I was fighting for freedom and for this higher ideal, and that I was protecting America from some evil insurgency that were going to come blow up more buildings. And I believed in what I was doing at the time. But as more information comes out, and especially the way we pulled out of Iraq, and then on top of that, how we pulled out of Afghanistan, those two things, like, it was for nothing. They took our sacrifices, the friends that are dead, are buried in Arlington right now, the blood, sweat, and tears that we spilt over in those countries' ground was for nothing because of the way our administration pulled out of those two countries. They wasted lives. They wasted our lives. And now I feel like I joined the Army based on lies, on a lot of lies. And that breaks my heart. I wanted to be fighting for something that was good. And I don't think I was anymore. At the time I did. At the time I really thought I was fighting for something worthwhile. And I felt that even more in Afghanistan because Taliban's pretty damn evil.
Pretty real, yeah.
They're evil, and you get to see them. Iraq, the enemy was pretty ambiguous. Honestly, I didn't get to interact with them. Most of the people who were fighting were civilians that were
Take $75.
Paid $75 or had their families kidnapped or threatened.
Yep.
Like, hey, we're going to kill your family if you don't go fight the Americans. Right? So Iraq was awful.
Yeah,
I hated Iraq. It felt wrong while we were there, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Like, there was just something off about the whole thing and oversimplified for sure. Afghanistan, I didn't mind fighting there at all. Like, this is clearly evil. I don't mind this at all.
It was very black and white.
Yes, it's very black and white. But then when we hand the country over to the Taliban, what? Start making deals with the Taliban?
China comes right in the very next day and
Start mining? Yeah.
Builds roads, official agreements with the Taliban. But really, we saw that over the years, just a massive money laundering scheme of our tax money that goes into these wars, right? It just magically disappears. And it's really just money laundering. It goes off to the friends that they went to Harvard with and whatever, right? They're little government puppets in Ukraine or whatever. And it just, our money goes away essentially, and then our friends die. And then we look at each other and we're like, whoa, what just happened? Why? You know?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, say you had an 18-year-old that was about to join right now, or they were thinking about it, they came home with a folder that said U.S. Army or Navy or whatever, right?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. And I hate saying it because it did take care of me, right? I had all these benefits. I'm retired and I'm 37. It's awesome. But
Just still young.
I'm still young. But today's Army? No. No. And if I knew what I knew today when I first joined, I probably wouldn't have joined either. But that took a lot of events for all of that to come to fruition. Because you remember how patriotic and pro-war everybody was when Iraq kicked off?
Yellow ribbons everywhere.
Like, people, like, giving you hugs when you came off the airplane from combat and stuff. Everybody was so blinded by lies. And, you know, during that period of time, like, I was like, heck yeah, join the Army. This is the way to go. Go do something good for our country, do something good for you. But now I'm like, I don't believe any of it was good at all. So I tell them no. And I've had some friends ask me to talk to their young, like, I have a friend, her daughter's a Marine, and she's in our church. And she was home on leave, and she's been in for like 2 years, not very long. And her re-up is coming up, and so her mom wanted me to talk to her.
Okay.
And I get it. I mean, you loved your job. I loved my job. There's something amazing about the group dynamic, and you love your unit. You love having a mission. It does build resilience. It does build strength. And that's an easy thing to fall in love with, especially when you're young and lower enlisted and you don't see how the the puppeteers.
You just don't see it yet,
You don't see it.
You're surrounded by great people, great mission. You're like, here we go, man. It's cool.
Yeah, you're physically active, you're super buff, it's awesome.
Yeah.
And then you get old and fat and grumpy, and you see who's pulling the strings up there, and it pisses you off.
You're like, this guy's in charge, he's a complete idiot.
Mm-hmm.
Can't even formulate a sentence, whoever.
And then you start thinking about all the dumb things you did when you were young and enlisted, and you just didn't understand why you were doing it. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, I see it now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, E7's always had this reputation for being jaded.
Yeah,
I get it why. I'm pretty jaded right now.
See, it's not all that bad, but yeah, there's some good major ups and major lows, I guess.
Yeah. When I was young, it was amazing for me.
Yeah,
but now that I understand what I was doing, I'm so fed up and done with it. I'm just mad. I feel like I was taken advantage of.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like my ideals and my patriotism were manipulated.
It's damn truth. Well, how do you feel about God after seeing all this crazy stuff?
So my relationship with God has definitely had its ups and downs throughout the years. I grew up in the church. I believed in God. Yeah, they say there's no atheists in a foxhole.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
Really?
I definitely turned to God in a lot of my darkest moments, but it wasn't until right before I married Andrew that I committed my life to Christ. And it was funny, I was on recruiting duty, and I hated recruiting, but I think God put me there for a very specific reason. It was to put me in a church that was good and solid. Army churches, not to talk trash, but they're transient. It's pretty light. You don't have a lot of sense of community because people are so in and out.
Bland.
Yeah. You say the sermons don't dive super deep most of the time.
Yeah, totally.
But I got put in a really solid church full of civilians when I was on recruiting duty. And at the time I was reading John. And all over John, Jesus says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. All over the place. And I started realizing, I had not been keeping his commandments. And I had this concept of cheap grace, where I was like, oh, God loves me. And because he loves me, he'll forgive me for all the nonsense, horrible stuff that I do. And so I just did things without caring. And that when I was reading John and going to this new church, it finally punched me in the face where I didn't love God. I was like, because if I did, I would have been obeying him. And so I repented at that point, and I gave my life over to Christ. And it was interesting. It's like, even though I still struggle with PTSD and I struggle with a lot of things, a lot of the other more confounding problems went away when I gave my life to Christ. I stopped. I didn't want to anymore. That got taken off of me. And it gave me hope. I have hope in Christ now and a future resurrection, and that everything, no matter how horrible it looks at the time, that ultimately it's glorifying to God and it'll be good for me or others, or it's serving his ultimate purpose. So God has been the one thing that's kept me going through all of it, through Andrew's death, through combat, through being raped, all of it. Because it kind of piles up sometimes, weighs on you, but I've given it to him, and I hope that he can take my story and do things for other people with it too.
It's interesting. I was heard in church this Sunday, I'm going to implement it into my other podcast. I really liked the statement. It was like, no matter how far you run, no matter what you do in life, heroin addict, womanizer, you could have murdered somebody, it doesn't matter, right? No matter how far you've ran, no matter how many times, 50 times, 100 times in your life, just completely turn your back on God, it doesn't matter, right? Often you just turn around every time, and he's always going to be right there for you, right, at a cornerstone. But I think we just run, and we don't ever keep our eyes on him. A lot of times we're focused on our human ambitions a lot, and not our work with and through God on this earth.
Yeah.
Which, that could be the healing right there. I mean, it sounds like it was in your life, right?
It was. Yeah. And like I said, I still have struggles.
Yeah.
But it's funny, Paul talks about that in the New Testament too, the thorn on his side, that for whatever reason God never removed. Paul had that thorn in his side throughout his whole life, whatever it was. And so I don't expect to ever just be completely free from PTSD necessarily. I think war leaves a mark. That might not ever go away. I'm a huge believer in post-traumatic growth and taking all the negative stuff and turning it into something positive,
I
something
like
that's
that.
uplifting for someone else.
Just like they tear you down in basic training and rebuild you, you can take that and turn it into growth.
Yeah.
I like that. It's strong. Well, last words. Any last words from you?
Well, it's been a pleasure. And I actually have a poem to leave with you. I have to look it up because if my husband was in here, I'd probably say it. But it's called The Hound of Heaven. It's talking about how God is always pursuing you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that poem, I want to look it up later.
Can you bring it up? Or no?
Yeah,
Hound of Heaven?
The Hound of Heaven. Yeah, I definitely experienced that. Like, God was tenaciously pursuing me through all of it, even when I was just rejecting Him over and over and over again. Is it super long?
It is long. Right. I was going to read it, but I'm like, way too long.
I remember it being long now.
But it's worthwhile of the audience, and I'll check it out.
Yeah, check out The Hound of Heaven.
Okay, fair enough. Well, this was Rachel's story. Hear it, feel it, and let it be a call to action. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Micah.
All right.